Jon Snow stood in the ruined throne room, half-buried beams casting jagged shadows across the blackened stone. Dust danced in the slices of light, and each step he took crunched on debris left in the wake of dragon fire. The air reeked of ash and sorrow. Smoke still wafted from the collapsed roof. His boots dragged as though weighted by every life lost. Ghost, his white direwolf, lingered near him, ears pressed back, muzzle low. No one spoke. Not Tyrion, who stared at the scorched columns with hollow eyes. Not Grey Worm, who lingered in the adjacent corridor with unsheathed spear in hand. And certainly not the Unsullied, who stood guard with silent vigilance, dispassionate in the face of the charred city. Daenerys Targaryen was above, some said, in the high tower of the Red Keep that still stood precariously among the rubble. She had marched through the streets like a conqueror after raising them, her silver hair bright in the sunlight, her face cold with purpose. Even after the bells tolled surrender, she had unleashed Drogon upon the people of King's Landing. From somewhere behind Jon, a cinder fell from a ruined tapestry, landing near his foot. It startled him, but not enough to knock him out of the numbness that had settled in his chest. He climbed the crumbling stairwell toward the tower, stepping around shattered stone. The stench of death followed him up, an inescapable reminder. Half-burned corpses cluttered corners, and the weeping of survivors echoed from the courtyards below. Many had huddled against walls, praying for mercy. He walked by them with a bowed head, giving what comfort he could in glances, but the enormity of what had happened swallowed any words. Each rung of the steps was a journey in itself, a moral reckoning that swirled in Jon's mind. He had pledged himself to Daenerys, named her his queen, the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and she had proven unstoppable, a bringer of fire and blood. At the top of the steps, a single unsullied warrior stood guard before a broken archway. The soldiers stood at attention, ever stoic. Jon signaled that he needed to speak with the queen. The warrior hesitated, his dark eyes flicking with doubt or suspicion, but with a slight nod he stepped aside. Jon walked through, unarmed, though he felt the weight of Longclaw on his hip, the Valyrian steel blade sheathed. He let his hand hover near the pommel for some small comfort. Daenerys stood near a remaining window that overlooked the scorched city below. Her hair was disheveled from the wind, her face streaked with soot, but her posture was regal, proud, triumphant. Behind her, Drogon's occasional roar carried from somewhere on a shattered wall, the last living dragon calling out, as if acknowledging his mother's dominion over cinder and bones. She turned at his footsteps, and for a moment, a glimmer of relief lit her face. Then she seemed to recall that his loyalty, once unwavering, might not be so certain. She regarded him with a cool glint in her violet eyes. Silence suspended between them. Jon took in her appearance. The set of her jaw, the lines of exhaustion, and the madness hovering just behind her gaze. They both listened to the faint lamentations rising from the city's ruins. "You're hurt," she said softly, her accent subdued, gesturing to where his arm bled through a tear in his black tunic. Jon only shook his head, emotion tightening his throat. "It doesn't matter. Look around us, Daenerys. Listen, can you hear them crying?" Her eyes flickered, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw a pang of regret. But then she inhaled, and whatever softness lingered in her expression hardened to steel. She took a step forward, her posture that of a queen addressing a subject. "I did what I had to do. I won't let fear or pity deter me from building a new world." Jon swallowed a bitter lump in his throat. The new world she spoke of teetered on a mountain of corpses. He recalled the day he first bent the knee, trusting that she would rule with justice, that her heart was kinder than Cersei's or any tyrant. She had been so compelling, her desire to break the wheel, to free the enslaved, to bring peace. Could it be that every act of brutality had been rationalized in her mind as a step toward a better tomorrow? "You burned children," he whispered, voice raw. "Women who were surrendering, soldiers who'd laid down their arms. We heard the bells." She took a deep breath, her lips trembling with emotion or anger. He couldn't tell which. "You think I'm proud of every death?" Her voice carried a faint tremor. I gave them a chance. They followed Cersei. They fought for her. They reaped what she sowed. Jon braced a hand against the wall, feeling the jagged stone under his fingertips. They were innocent people. Daenerys lowered her gaze to the floor, silent for a moment, then lifted her chin again. My enemies will know fear. I'm done begging for what is mine by right. And you, Jon, will you stand by my side, or will you betray me? A swirl of sorrow, guilt, and duty weighed on him. He remembered the oaths he'd sworn, the fights he'd endured against the Night King, side by side with Daenerys. They had saved each other's lives more than once. He recalled her tearful face when she lost Yora, her rage when she lost Missandei. The losses had piled upon her, forging a merciless shell around the woman he had loved. I don't want to betray you. He struggled to form the words. I wanted to save you, but after what you've done, my queen, we can't ignore this. She took a step forward, bridging the space between them. The intensity of her gaze was scorching. We destroyed the army of the dead together. We were the only ones who ever truly fought for humanity. Don't turn your back on me now, Jon. He closed his eyes, mustering the resolve to do what felt impossible. When he opened them, his decision was set. I'm not turning my back on you, he said slowly. I'm asking you to see reason before you lose yourself entirely. Step down. Let the lords of the realm decide your fate. Surrender yourself to something greater than this cycle of violence. A flicker of betrayal passed over her face. You want me to surrender? After all the sacrifices, after everything I've done for these people? I'm the breaker of chains. I freed them, and you would have me bend the knee to these same lords who betrayed my family. Jon wanted to argue, but the words were stuck. He glanced out at the city. Smoke rose in columns, and far below, a small boy tried to pull his limp mother from the rubble. Jon's heart twisted. That child would be haunted forever. Children across the realm would remember this day as the day the Dragon Queen laid waste to the innocent. He forced himself to meet her eyes again. I can't pretend I support what you did. If you'll not step down, if you'll not see reason, then by the power I have as king in the north. He paused, voice nearly failing him. I banish you from these lands. I name you kinslayer of the realm you vowed to protect. And I strip you of my loyalty. The words were harsh, unthinkable moments before, but in his mind he saw the scorched streets, the bodies. He remembered the naive love he had felt for her, and how it had died in flame. Daenerys stared at him, her mouth parted in disbelief, and then she laughed. It was not a laugh of joy or amusement. It was disbelief laced with anger and heartbreak. Banish me? You are not the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, even if you carry the blood of the dragon in your veins. What authority do you claim? He took a breath. A king must protect his people. The North chose me because they believed I'd keep them safe, even from the Iron Throne's wrath. Now I speak for more than just the North. Tyrion, Davos, the lords who survived, they're willing to stand behind me. They've seen what you can do. Her face twisted with something between fury and despair. You would do this to me, your queen? Your aunt? The woman you claimed to love? Shame and sorrow warred on his face. I wish I could take it all back. But after what's happened, I can't let you rule. I can't let you bring this destruction to the rest of the realm. Too many have died. Too many are living in terror. She studied him, and for a moment her lower lip trembled. Jon glimpsed the woman she once was, the hopeful breaker of chains, the mother of dragons who once wept for the lost and the downtrodden. Then she drew herself up, the imposing Targaryen fire roiling behind her eyes. You may try to banish me, but I have Drogon. I have the Unsullied. Do you think I will just leave? Jon's jaw tightened. He considered the grim reality. Drogon could burn him alive in an instant. The Unsullied still outnumbered any living force left in King's Landing. It wouldn't be easy to enforce a banishment, not with a dragon-riding queen who commanded fanatical loyalty. Yet, as he stood in that ruined tower, as he felt the ghosts of those who died in the city calling out for justice, he knew there was no other way. The cycle of retribution had to break somewhere. "I'm asking you," he said, voice trembling slightly, "to leave and never return, to cease your claim on the Iron Throne. If you refuse, you'll only make more enemies, and the realm will rise against you." She let out a shaky breath. "I gave up everything. I lost my closest friends, my children, my dragons, Regal, Viserion. And now you?" He looked away, lest the sorrow in her eyes weaken his resolve. "We have to be better than those before us." Outside, Drogon roared again. Jon could sense the mounting tension, sensed that the entire city was balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for a single spark to ignite another wave of violence. Daenerys looked over the remains of the throne room, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly. She might have been struggling with what remained of her conscience, or perhaps she was just calculating. In the end, she exhaled, and her voice came out flat. "Fine," she said with a venom-laced calm. "You banish me. The man who's rightful king by blood but refuses the throne dares to banish me." A mirthless smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "How do you imagine yourself enforcing this sentence, Jon Snow?" Jon felt a wave of relief that she hadn't immediately ordered Drogon to incinerate him. "I want you to live," he said softly, stepping closer. "I want you far from here. Go back to Essos if that's where your heart leads you, or find new lands. But do not return to Westeros with fire and blood." She let out a small, trembling laugh. "You speak of mercy, but you mean to exile me from my rightful home. Westeros has suffered enough. If you truly care for this realm, leave it in peace." Her eyes bore into his. Another silence fell between them, broken only by a gust of wind through the cracked wall. Then Daenerys moved with an abrupt step, turning from him to stare out at the city once more. If she wept, he couldn't see it. She stood there for what felt like an hour, though it could only have been minutes, hardly moving, hardly breathing. Finally, she turned back to him, her expression carved from ice. "Very well," she whispered. "I will leave, but mark my words. I will never forgive this betrayal. And if the people of Westeros dare to threaten me again, or if they think to hunt me down in foreign lands, I will return. And no man, woman, or child will be spared." Jon felt the chill of her words wash over him. This was a fragile peace, a tenuous compromise. With a final, accusing look, Daenerys strode past him. A swirl of dark Targaryen-styled leather and silver braids. The Unsullied at the door parted to let her pass. Jon followed at a distance, uncertain if at any moment she might change her mind and command Drogon to rain fire upon the city yet again. But she walked in silence, her boots echoing on the scorched floor. In the courtyard, a host of Unsullied and Dothraki warriors gathered. Grey Worm stepped forward, concern in his eyes as he looked from Jon to Daenerys. She gave the slightest shake of her head, a gesture that told him not to raise arms yet. The tension thickened, the air practically humming with the possibility of violence. Soldiers who had fought for Daenerys, who had once believed in her promise of a better world, looked uncertain and afraid. Jon approached Grey Worm, speaking low so others would not overhear. "She's to leave," he said. "We won't hinder her departure. But if she attempts to burn the city again, we'll defend it." Grey Worm's face remained impassive, though a flicker of something, pain, confusion, passed over his features. "You banish the queen?" he asked, voice sharp with disbelief. Jon nodded, swallowing. "It's the only way." Grey Worm's grip on his spear tightened. For a moment, it seemed he might argue, might thrust the spear at Jon and let bloodshed commence anew. But Grey Worm had once followed Daenerys's every command, devoted to her cause. If she had truly accepted exile, it was not his place to question. Instead of violence, the Unsullied commander bowed his head in a stiff acknowledgement. Across the courtyard, Drogon landed with a thunderous impact. Dust and ash flurried around him. His black scales glistened in the sooty light, and his molten eyes locked on Jon Snow. Daenerys approached the beast she called her child, placing her hand on the scales of his neck. Drogon's hiss reverberated through the crumbling walls. Jon held his breath, waiting to see if she would depart peacefully. He could feel Ghost at his side, the direwolf's ears pinned back, teeth slightly bared, but obeying Jon's silent command not to engage. Ghost too seemed torn. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, and for a moment, she stared down at Jon with a gaze that transcended heartbreak. There was rage there, incomprehension at the scope of what had happened, and a flicker of wounded vulnerability. But a moment later, her lips pressed into a grim line. She turned Drogon's massive head toward the open sky, and with one powerful beat of his wings, the dragon rose from the courtyard, sending swirling ash in every direction. She soared higher, the last dragon of Westeros carrying the exiled queen away from her conquest. Soldiers and survivors alike watched with awe and dread as Daenerys ascended. The roar that erupted across the sky shook the walls. Then Drogon angled toward the horizon. Jon Snow stood there, shoulders slumped, every muscle in his body trembling with the weight of what he had just done. The ashes of King's Landing settled around him like gray snow, coating his hair, his armor, his skin. He looked at Tyrion, who emerged from behind a crumbled arch, face streaked with tears. Then Jon closed his eyes, and in the private darkness of his lids, he wondered if this was truly a mercy or yet another tragedy. Days passed, or perhaps it was weeks. Time seemed to function differently in the aftermath of such destruction. The people of King's Landing crawled out of the rubble, burying their dead, searching desperately for food and water. Tyrion took it upon himself to organize relief efforts, distributing what little resources remained. Davos Seaworth, who had always been a man of compassion, worked tirelessly with the survivors, trying to restore order. The Dothraki, leaderless and confounded without their Khaleesi's guiding presence, lingered on the outskirts, unsure if they should sail back to Essos or wait for word from their queen. The Unsullied, abiding by Grey Worm's silent directives, maintained a tense but peaceable presence, preventing further looting or vengeance killings in the ruins of King's Landing. Jon Snow found himself in a tentative position of leadership. He was not crowned king of the Seven Kingdoms. He insisted he had no desire to wear the crown, but men and women alike looked to him for guidance. He had challenged Daenerys, parted ways with her, and in doing so seemed to symbolize the realm's last hope for stability. The secret of his parentage, once a ticking time bomb, now barely mattered compared to the cataclysm that had just transpired. Some whispered that he was indeed Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir, but few had the energy to debate the intricacies of succession while they dug graves for loved ones. Jon spent his days helping wherever he could. He lifted rubble from the collapsed homes, carried water from the wells, comforted orphans who had lost everything. Guilt weighed heavily on him. He had pledged to Daenerys, had believed in her, and in many ways he felt responsible for the destruction. His nights were sleepless, plagued by visions of dragonfire and screams. Ghost stayed close, a silent companion who sensed Jon's turmoil. One evening, as the sun set in a band of crimson light over the blackened rooftops, Tyrion found Jon in what remained of a courtyard garden. Charred stumps of rose bushes dotted the scorched earth. Tyrion approached slowly, brushing ash from his sleeves. The Lannister wore no finery now, just a simple tunic and breeches that were already dusty from the day's labors. Jon barely noticed him at first, his gaze fixed on a single surviving sapling that had somehow escaped the flames. It stood upright but wilted, leaves gray at the edges. "The people are afraid," Tyrion said, his voice gentle, though his eyes carried a melancholy that seemed unshakable. Jon nodded, but didn't speak at first. Tyrion continued, "They see the Unsullied still here. They're uncertain if Daenerys plans to return with fire and fury, and they're looking to you for guidance. You banished her. How do we ensure she stays gone?" Jon let out a breath. The question weighed on him. "I don't know. She could return at any time if she wishes. We have no way to stop Drogon." Tyrion folded his hands. "Then perhaps we should fortify the city, attempt to restore defenses, though the city's in ruins. Or we could gather the armies of the other kingdoms to prepare. Already, I've sent ravens to the lords of Westeros. They need to know the situation." Jon scraped at the ash with the heel of his boot. I did what I thought was right. But you're correct. If she comes back, with her dragon, we're helpless. Yet what's the alternative? Another war, more bloodshed. Tyrion looked at him with a grave expression. We must hope she has enough sense not to return, or that the realm might unite against her. But there's another matter. With Daenerys gone, who rules? Jon stiffened, shaking his head. I don't want the throne, Tyrion. You know that. Yes, you've said so many times. But the wheel doesn't just vanish because we wish it so. The people need leadership. Jon thought of Sansa, of Bran, of Arya. Their faces brought him a pang of longing for Winterfell, for the simplicity of a place that felt like home. Gather the surviving lords and ladies of Westeros. Let them decide who sits on the throne. Tyrion let out a small sigh. Do you trust them to make a wise choice? We'll have to, Jon answered. It's the only way forward. In the following days, ravens flew across the land, calling lords and ladies to King's Landing, or what was left of it. Slowly they arrived. Gendry Baratheon came from Storm's End. Uncertain but bearing the new name of House Baratheon the Queen had granted him before all went to chaos. Brienne of Tarth arrived in a battered suit of armor, accompanied by Podrick Payne, determined to see justice done. Yara Greyjoy came from the Iron Islands, eyeing the destruction with uneasy distaste. Robin Arryn of the Vale sent a delegate, as did the new Prince of Dorne, though neither came themselves in person, wary of traveling into a city so recently aflame. Edmure Tully came from Riverrun, older and more cautious after his years as a hostage under the phrase. Samwell Tarly rode from Horn Hill, heart heavy, carrying books and a deep worry etched into his face. From the north came Sansa Stark, red hair braided intricately, her blue eyes keen and serious. She brought with her a retinue of northern soldiers who looked upon King's Landing's burnt ruins with grim silence. Though Winterfell's alliance with Daenerys had once been vital, Sansa had long mistrusted the Dragon Queen's impulses. Now, seeing the devastation, she felt a cold anger toward her brother. Cousin, she corrected herself, Jon, for not acting sooner. They gathered in the Red Keep's courtyard, or what remained of it, for there was no suitable throne room. Large chunks of stone had fallen, leaving a clearing of rubble surrounded by half-toppled arches. Some men and women stood on broken pillars, others on improvised platforms. Soldiers kept watch, ensuring there were no assassins or hidden threats. Jon stood before them, grim and silent, alongside Tyrion, Davos, and the rest of the fragile coalition that had emerged after Daenerys' departure. The murmurs in the crowd were low, anxious. They knew the unspeakable tragedy they faced. The city's population decimated, the monarchy in question, the Targaryen queen exiled. Finally, Tyrion raised his voice for all to hear. Lords and ladies of Westeros, we gather in this place of destruction with heavy hearts. The queen who conquered the city has departed, banished by Jon Snow for the act of raising King's Landing. Our future is uncertain. Will she return? Will another claim the throne? How do we restore peace? Sansa's voice rang out, clear and commanding despite her slender frame. If Daenerys Targaryen ever sets foot in Westeros again, we must unite to stop her. She's proven she's willing to burn cities and kill innocents. We cannot abide another mad king or mad queen on the throne. Yara Greyjoy folded her arms, glancing around. The Iron Islands bent the knee to Daenerys. We fought for her, but after seeing the aftermath, I cannot stand by such carnage. Her lips pursed. If she were to return, she'd find no allies among my people. Gendry Baratheon spoke hesitantly. She legitimized me, named me Lord of Storm's End. I was grateful for that, but the bells were ringing. It should have ended there. She slaughtered countless innocents. Even I can't stand behind that. Brienne of Tarth turned her solemn gaze on Jon. And what of you, Lord Snow, or King Targaryen, as some say? Will you claim the throne? Jon raised his hands to quell the chatter that arose. I have no wish to rule the Seven Kingdoms. My only concern is protecting the people. We cannot let the realm descend into chaos. but choose someone else to sit the throne. Someone who can unite us and ensure peace." Sansa inhaled, shifting her weight. She eyed Jon with a mix of lingering resentment and understanding. "I know you don't want the throne, Jon, but who will lead? We can't decide in a single moment." "Then let's speak of it," Edmure Tully offered, clearing his throat. "We saw how quickly a conqueror with a dragon took power. Maybe we need a different kind of system, something safer. Or we choose a king by election." He seemed proud of the idea, referencing Tyrion's speech from the end of the wars. Each lord and lady casts a vote. A rustle of discussion followed. Yara raised an eyebrow, uncertain if such a system was feasible. Gendry shrugged, willing to consider something new. Samwell Tarly stepped forward, eyes bright with conviction. "We could try democracy, letting all the people have a say." He was cut off by the inevitable ripple of laughter and dismissal, as most lords and ladies scoffed at the notion of granting peasants the right to choose. The cynicism of the old order persisted, battered though it was. Sam bowed his head, acknowledging that it was too radical for them now. Tyrion steered the conversation back. "Then let us, the lords and ladies here, choose the next ruler. The realm needs stability. We can't wait for Daenerys to return. Let us place someone on the throne who can rebuild." Sansa spoke firmly. "I propose a Stark to rule, but it won't be me. I intend to see the North remain independent as it was promised in times long past." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Some questioned if the North should be allowed to secede. Others recognized that the realm might well fracture if forced to remain under a single crown after all this bloodshed. In the midst of the debate, Bran Stark arrived quietly. He had traveled slower, escorted by a few companions. His eyes, distant and knowing, scanned the ruin. He seemed unmoved by the destruction, serene in a way that unsettled many. Sansa placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. "I suggested you come because you understand the realm better than any of us. You see everything past and present. Maybe you'll guide us to a better future." Some called out that Bran Stark had no desire to rule, that he was no more than a crippled boy turned mystic. Others murmured that the realm needed wisdom over ambition. Tyrion studied Bran with thoughtful curiosity. While they deliberated, Jon's gaze drifted to the place where the Iron Throne had once stood. Now it was a heap of molten slag and twisted steel, destroyed in the flames that consumed the city. He wondered if that was a sign, a symbol that the old ways of monarchy were as broken as the throne itself. Still, some argued for tradition. Others wanted a new approach entirely. In a hushed vote, with no small amount of discussion, the majority of lords and ladies found themselves converging on Bran Stark. They recalled that the boy had grown into something else, a keeper of memories, a living record of humanity. Tyrion championed him, citing that the best ruler might be someone who didn't crave power. Sansa, protective, nonetheless assented that if Bran chose to take the throne, the North should be recognized as independent. After some negotiation, and acknowledging the devastation wrought upon King's Landing and the near extinction of House Targaryen's line in Westeros, the lords agreed. Bran Stark would sit on a newly fashioned seat of rule. The 7 kingdoms, or rather the 6 kingdoms, would remain united under him, while the North stood separate, crowned under Sansa Stark. A wave of acceptance passed through the crowd, though it was tinged with uncertainty and exhaustion. They had no better solution, and no one present had the appetite for more war. Tyrion then addressed the pressing matter. "We still face a threat. Daenerys Targaryen is out there in exile. She may return with her dragon. We must be prepared. We must also find a path to healing for the people she has harmed." Sansa nodded. "We start by rebuilding. We feed the hungry, shelter those who lost their homes, restore the farmland around the city, and ensure we're ready to face any threat. That is the task of every lord here." Bran, in a soft voice, said, "I will do what I can. We must be vigilant. The future is uncertain, but I can guide us." Jon, listening, felt a mix of relief and resignation. He had cast Daenerys out, and now the realm was at least united in the desire to move forward. The ghosts of King's Landing still haunted him, but perhaps he could do some good, help the people, and keep watch in case Daenerys ever returned. The assembly ended with a fragile alliance. Bran Stark was declared king of the Six Kingdoms, the North was declared free under Sansa Stark, and the rest would do what they must to rebuild. Tyrion was named Hand of the King, to atone for his past misjudgments by guiding the new era. Davos took on the role of Master of Ships, Gendry as Master of War, and Brienne as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Time passed like a slow tide as the city struggled to recover. The charred streets were cleared, mass graves dug, and rudimentary shelters erected for the homeless. At the site of the melted Iron Throne, work began on constructing a new seat for Bran, though he rarely used a traditional seat, instead preferring a wheelchair. The symbolism was enough. A new seat for a new age. Jon rarely involved himself in courtly matters. He worked behind the scenes, traveling outside the city walls to speak with refugees, coordinate with the small folk who were gradually returning. He wanted no part in deciding the policies of the realm. He had done enough damage by supporting Daenerys as far as he had. Guilt and heartbreak lingered, each memory of her braided hair or fierce laughter overshadowed by the screams of King's Landing. Soon, whispers began circulating that Daenerys had crossed the narrow sea with a small band of Dothraki, that she had established a temporary base in Pentos. Others rumored she had gone farther east to Meereen or Volantis, perhaps to rebuild her strength among the freedmen who adored her. No one knew for sure. The uncertainty kept the realm on edge, but it also gave them the smallest hope that maybe she would not return. Maybe she would carve out a life elsewhere, seeking to rule free cities or new territories. Yet, every time a raven arrived with news of a dragon sighting, be it Drogon glimpsed flying somewhere over the horizon, tremors of fear spread through the realm. Tyrion would dispatch scouts, but no sign of Daenerys on Westerosi soil emerged. Winter gradually loosened its grip, though in the north the cold remained. Months turned into a year turned into 2. King Bran governed with quiet, measured judgment. Sansa Stark's north thrived independently, forging alliances based on trade and mutual protection. Yara Greyjoy rebuilt the Iron Fleet, though it was used more for commerce than raiding. Gendry Baratheon worked tirelessly to repair roads and fortify the Stormlands. A fragile peace existed, fueled by the shared trauma of the war. Jon Snow, though named Warden of the South by Bran's decree, a largely symbolic role, found himself restless. He lived in the Red Keep, but it never felt like home. Night after night, he roamed the corridors or walked the city walls, haunted by memory. His greatest act was the banishment of Daenerys Targaryen, and it defined him still. Did he do the right thing? Should he have ended her life to spare the realm the fear of her return? Should he have gone with her into exile? The questions plagued him endlessly. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the city, Jon walked to the harbor district, accompanied by Ghost. The newly rebuilt docks were busy with fishing vessels and merchant ships bringing supplies for reconstruction. The once ruined district showed signs of life. Children ran through the streets, fishmongers hawked their wares, and new wooden beams replaced the scorched ones. He saw a group of orphans playing near the wharf. Their clothes were ragged, but they laughed, chasing each other around barrels. Jon paused, remembering how they had once huddled in fear in the shadows of the Red Keep. One of the children recognized him. They called him the Wolf King, though Jon always corrected them. Still, they ran up, bright-eyed, and asked if he had any stories of the North or the dragons. He tried to muster a smile to give them some warmth. While he was talking with them, he heard a muffled cough behind him. Turning, he saw Davos Seaworth. The Onion Knight wore a worn cloak, and his face bore lines of worry. He nodded curtly at Jon. "My lord, or should I call you king in the south?" Davos teased gently, though his humor did little to mask the seriousness in his eyes. "Tyrion's been looking for you. There's news of a disturbance in the east." Jon's stomach tightened, and he knew at once what that could imply. He gave a brief farewell to the children and followed Davos back to the keep. The corridors bustled with servants and guards. Tyrion was waiting in a solar that overlooked the bay. The small man paced near a table littered with maps and raven scrolls. When Jon entered, Tyrion's eyes flicked up, relief and tension mingling in his expression. "Jon, I'm glad you're here. We've had word from Pentos. It seems Daenerys Targaryen might be gathering forces." Jon inhaled sharply, the air thick in his lungs. "What do we know?" Tyrion tapped a scroll with a thoughtful finger. "Reports say Drogon was sighted near Pentos. A new call may have allied with her. Some claim she's forging an army of sellswords. Others say she's traveling city to city, stirring supporters. Freed slaves who remember her as the breaker of chains. Loyalists from Essos who want to see her reclaim Westeros." Davos crossed his arms. "If that's true, she might try to land somewhere else along the coast. Not necessarily King's Landing. The realm is still weak from the wars. If she strikes a vulnerable kingdom first, she could build momentum." Jon felt a weight press down on him. He had hoped she would remain across the sea, nurse her wounds in some distant land. But it seemed her ambitions, or her vengeance, had not died. "We must confirm this. Are the reports reliable?" Tyrion shook his head slightly. "They're unverified, but there are multiple sources. We can't ignore them." Jon set his jaw. He remembered her parting words, the promise that if she ever returned, she would spare no one. Perhaps she had spent the last few years consolidating her power, waiting for the right moment to strike. The realm was more stable now, but still fragile. "What does King Bran say?" Jon asked. A pause, then Tyrion gestured at another scroll. "His Grace has commanded that we prepare for the worst. He can't see everything, but he has glimpses, scattered visions. He believes Daenerys may indeed be on the move. The question is, do we attempt to strike first, or wait and see if she truly intends to invade?" Jon ran a hand through his hair, which had grown long again, reminiscent of his days on the wall. "We can't just sail across the narrow sea and attack. We don't have the resources or the moral ground. She hasn't actively attacked us yet. We'd look like the aggressors." Tyrion nodded. "Precisely. And if we do nothing, we risk letting her build an unstoppable army." Davos shrugged. "The other lords are still rebuilding their lands. They might not have the appetite or the strength for an overseas war." Jon's mind churned. "Then we prepare, quietly but decisively. Fortify the major ports. Ensure every castle is ready for a dragon assault. Arm the scorpions, though we saw how easily Drogon destroyed those last time. We must gather the lords again. Let them know the potential threat." Tyrion exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I'll send ravens to the realm." Jon stepped away from the table, staring out at the bay. The gulls circled overhead. The water shimmered in the morning sun. The notion of Daenerys returning with Drogon to exact vengeance twisted his insides. Once, the thought of her presence brought him warmth, love. Now it conjured dread. Days stretched into weeks as ravens flew, and hush preparations were made. Troops were drilled, archers trained in firing at airborne targets, blacksmiths churned out ballista bolts. The lords of Westeros responded with varying degrees of urgency. Some believed the rumors might be exaggerated. Others, like Sansa, took them very seriously. She dispatched northern soldiers to Moat Cailin, the strategic choke point into the north, and set watchers along the eastern shores. Yara Greyjoy patrolled the coasts, prepared to spot any sign of an invading fleet. Gendry oversaw the forging of new war machines. Tormund Giantsbane, who had remained in the north, sent word that he and the Free Folk would stand ready if needed, though they would not march south unless the threat was dire. As these defensive measures took shape, life went on in King's Landing. Shops reopened, new houses rose from the rubble, and the scars of Dragonfire, though still visible, slowly healed beneath fresh layers of paint and plaster. Jon often walked through these reborn streets, marveling at the resilience of people who had suffered so deeply. Sometimes they recognized him, offering a respectful nod or a small bow, though he insisted he was no king. Late one evening, as he returned to the Red Keep, he found Sansa waiting for him in the courtyard. The torches threw dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the resolute set of her jaw and the concern in her eyes. She wore a heavy cloak, embroidered with the direwolf sigil of House Stark, a subtle assertion of northern independence. "Jon," she said, voice quiet, "I'm leaving for Winterfell tomorrow. I just wanted to speak with you before I go." He nodded, a faint sadness tugging at him. He hadn't spent much time with her of late, the duties of rebuilding a city having consumed him. "What is it?" She hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. "I want you to come home, to the north. Let the Southerners sort out their own kingdoms. You've given enough, lost enough. When I look at you, I see a man who's tormented. You don't have to stay here, waiting for her return." Jon exhaled, glancing up at the star-flecked sky. "I need to see it through. If she does come back, I have to do what I can to prevent another massacre." He cast his eyes downward. "I banished her, Sansa. If she returns, it's on me to face her." Sansa's lips tightened. "You were never responsible for the choices Daenerys made. She alone bears that burden." He recalled the moment he told her of his Targaryen heritage, how it had all spiraled after that, fueling Daenerys' paranoia and sense of betrayal. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but I still feel I must stay. For the people here, for the realm. Bran may be king, but he can't command an army or rally hearts. He can guide them, but he needs others to be his sword and shield." She sighed, understanding but not happy about it. "Very well. The North stands with you, should the threat become real. But be careful, Jon. Daenerys is not the same woman you once loved." He nodded, pain flickering in his eyes. "I know." She gave him a swift, almost brotherly embrace, and then departed into the night, leaving him with the cold hush of the courtyard. Days later, more news arrived, this time from Braavos. A fleet had set sail under the Targaryen banner, a black dragon on a red field, though the banners were ragged, perhaps newly stitched. The Braavosi reported it was a modest fleet, but led by a single, massive black dragon overhead. The ships held a mix of foreign soldiers, Essos words, Dothraki riders. The report could not confirm Daenerys' presence aboard, but who else would command Drogon? Tyrion wasted no time. He called the small council together and had the war drums sounded. Every able-bodied soldier in the city prepared, manning walls, scorpions, ballistae. The newly rebuilt gates of King's Landing were fortified. Scouts took to swift ships, hoping to intercept the fleet or at least keep watch on their approach. Ravens flew again, summoning allies. The city's people, though still traumatized, prepared for the unthinkable, a second conquest. Jon stood on the ramparts as dusk fell, gazing out over the sea. He felt the knot in his chest tighten. If Daenerys came, would she come to talk or simply to destroy? Could he reason with her? Had she hardened her heart entirely? The uncertainty gnawed at him. A day passed, then two, with no sign of the fleet. On the third day, an alarm rang from the harbor watchtower. A line of sails appeared on the horizon, moving slowly but steadily toward the city. At their forefront, a monstrous silhouette soared through the clouds. Even from a distance, Jon recognized Drogon's shape. Smoke or steam billowed from the dragon's maw in the cool sea air. The city went into a controlled panic, the watch bells tolling, soldiers rushing. To defensive positions. Archers lined the battlements. Ballista crews readied their bolts. Civilians sought shelter in cellars and behind thick walls, remembering all too well the dragonfire that had once consumed them. Jon made his way to the highest tower still intact, the vantage offering a clear view of the bay. Tyrion was there with a spyglass, Davos at his side. Tyrion lowered the spyglass, face pale. "It's her," he confirmed grimly. "The fleet is small, but Drogon alone is enough to cause massive damage. I see Dothraki, some sort of new Sellsword company. No sign of catapults or siege towers. Likely they rely on the dragon to breach the walls." Jon clenched his fists. "We must try to parley. She might still listen." Tyrion glanced at him, anguish in his expression. "Are you sure? The last time we tried to negotiate, it ended in flames." Jon remembered that bleak day at the gates of King's Landing, when Missandei was executed. But he had to believe there was another way. We must try, for all our sakes. As the fleet drew closer, the defenders tensed. Yara Greyjoy's ships had formed a blockade around the port, but Drogon's presence made that blockade tenuous at best. The massive dragon swooped low over the water, letting loose a roar that echoed across the city. The Sellsword galleys advanced, but did not fire upon the Greyjoy ships. It was an unnerving stalemate. At Jon's urging, Tyrion ordered a white flag of truce to be raised at the harbor fortress. The meaning was clear. They sought parley. In response, Drogon circled, then soared overhead, letting out a column of flame that stopped short of the city walls, a fiery warning. The tension was suffocating. Eventually, a small boat departed from the lead galley, carrying 3 figures. One was unmistakably Grey Worm, the other 2 presumably Dothraki bloodriders. They rowed toward the harbor fort under the watchful gaze of archers and scorpion crews. Jon descended to the harbor, where Tyrion and Davos joined him. They greeted Grey Worm with a rigid courtesy. Grey Worm's face was carved from stone, bearing the scars of bitterness and unwavering loyalty. "Our queen requests a meeting with the one who banished her," he said, voice resonating with controlled fury. "She will speak with Jon Snow, no one else." Jon exchanged a glance with Tyrion and Davos. Both looked worried, but Jon swallowed hard. "I'll go," he said. "Have her come ashore under truce. No harm will come to her if she doesn't attack." Grey Worm inclined his head. "She comes with Drogon. This is non-negotiable." Jon nodded. "Then we'll meet outside the gates. We can speak there." So it was arranged. The watchers on the battlements whispered of potential treachery as Jon Snow and a small guard of knights and archers prepared to meet Daenerys Targaryen on the open field just outside King's Landing's walls. The memory of how she had once attacked a Lannister caravan on an open field, how unstoppable her dragon was, hung in everyone's mind. But they had little choice if they wished to avoid immediate destruction. At midday, the city gates opened, and Jon, dressed in plain black leathers with Ghost at his side, walked out accompanied by Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and a handful of knights. A line of archers stood on the walls behind them. Arrows knocked, scorpions aimed. It wouldn't do much good if Drogon unleashed his flames, but it was the best deterrent they had. The Essos contingent arrived in formation. Unsullied in neat rows, Dothraki astride horses, and at the front, a single figure in dark armor, silver hair braided, riding upon the black dragon. Daenerys wore a stern expression, her eyes fixed on Jon. When Drogon alighted on the ground, the impact shook the earth. Smoke drifted from his nostrils. Daenerys dismounted. She looked as regal and formidable as ever, but there was a new hardness to her features. The last time Jon had seen her, she was flying away from the burning city in defeat, exiled. Now, the fire in her eyes told him she had come to reclaim what she believed was hers, or to exact vengeance for being cast out. The two faced each other with only a few yards of scorched grass between them. Ghost bristled at Jon's side, but did not growl. Daenerys spared the direwolf a glance, then fixed her gaze on Jon. Silence stretched, heavy and tense. Neither moved. Finally, Daenerys spoke, her voice taut. "You banished me from my birthright. You left me with nothing." She glanced at the city walls, half repaired from her last assault. "I see you've tried to rebuild, but you can't erase the memory of my conquest, can you?" Jon kept his tone calm. "You burned them after they surrendered. There was no honor in it." Her eyes flashed. "They bent the knee out of fear. Fear is how you control a realm that refuses to accept its rightful queen. They named me Mysa. They called me Breaker of Chains. These are not empty titles. In Essos, I am loved, worshipped. But here, you cast me out as a murderer." Tyrion stepped forward cautiously. "Thousands died that day, Your Grace. We are still burying the dead, in our hearts if not in the ground. We do not wish for more bloodshed." Daenerys stared Tyrion down, her lip curling slightly. "You betrayed me, Lannister. You and Jon Snow both. After all I did for you." She cut herself off, shaking her head, unable or unwilling to dredge up old arguments. Instead, She gestured to Drogon, who bristled at her side. I have come back to claim the throne that is mine. If you resist, you will burn. If you kneel, you may live. Jon felt his heart sink. Clearly, she had not come for any kind of peaceful resolution. There is no Iron Throne, he said, voice hoarse. You destroyed it yourself along with the city, and the realm has chosen Bran Stark as king. Her laugh was a short, bitter bark. A boy who can't even walk? You replace a dragon queen with a cripple? Are you all mad? Jon forced steadiness into his voice. He is wise. He will not wage unjust wars. The people support him. Daenerys' anger flared. The people? The ones who cowered in fear when I freed them from Cersei's tyranny? The ones who clung to their old masters the moment I sailed away? Their loyalty is worthless. They deserve the queen they fear if they cannot love me. Jon took a step closer, ignoring the hiss from Drogon. Daenerys, please. Enough death. We've had enough war. Stay in Essos. Rule there if that is your wish, but spare these lands. We will not challenge you across the sea. This realm wants peace. She looked at him with cold pity. You would beg for peace now, after you took everything from me? The throne, my authority, my dignity. Her voice rose. I offered you the world by my side. You refused. Now you will pay for that betrayal. Her eyes flickered with a violent gleam, and for a heartbeat, Jon thought she might command Drogon to unleash a torrent of flame. The soldiers on the walls tensed. Ghost let out a low growl, stepping forward. Jon raised a hand to calm the direwolf, though his own pulse hammered. Brienne, ever courageous, moved slightly in front of Tyrion. Davos put a trembling hand on his sword hilt, even knowing it would do little good against a dragon. The Unsullied behind Daenerys stood ready, spears raised. Jon tried one last time. Daenerys, please. The last time you burned this city, it broke you. She glared at him. I was never broken. I was robbed. Robbed of my right to free this realm from the tyranny of the old families, the old ways. You and your wolves and lions are no different. You only replaced one system with another. I am here to finish what I started. Then there's nothing left to say, Jon murmured, heartbreak coiling in his chest. Daenerys' eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. You made your choice the moment you banished me. If you will not kneel, you will burn. With that, she snapped a command in High Valyrian, and Drogon inhaled, massive lungs expanding. Fire flickered between his fangs. No! Jon shouted, drawing Longclaw. He knew it was futile, but his instincts roared at him to do something. The archers on the wall loosed a volley of arrows at the dragon. Scorpion bolts soared. Drogon twisted, swatting some arrows aside with his wings and letting others glance harmlessly off his scales. A few bolts found their mark, lodging in Drogon's side, but the dragon roared and unleashed a rush of flame toward the gatehouse. Stone cracked, wood ignited, screams rose. Chaos erupted. The Unsullied charged forward, clashing with Jon's knights. The Dothraki thundered around the flanks, war cries piercing the air. Tyrion shouted for order, but the swirl of battle drowned him out. Drogon took flight, circling overhead, unleashing bursts of fire upon the city's defenses. Though ballista crews tried to aim, panic and swirling smoke made it nearly impossible to get a clear shot. Jon met Grey Worm in the chaos, their blades striking sparks from one another. Grey Worm was a peerless warrior, fueled by unwavering loyalty to Daenerys. Jon fought with grim determination, but his heart was breaking with every blow. Ghost threw himself into the fray, teeth snapping at Unsullied spears. Tyrion, unarmed, scrambled to avoid the melee, cursing fate under his breath as Davos and Brienne fought valiantly nearby. A swirl of smoke enveloped the battlefield. Jon glimpsed Daenerys commanding Drogon from above, her face set in merciless wrath. The overshadowing shape of the beast blotted out the sun, and the ground quaked at each wing beat. Jon's mind spiraled back to that day when the bells had rung, and King's Landing burned. He had banished her, hoping to avoid more atrocities. But here they were, repeating the same horror. He cursed himself, Cursed fate. Cursed the illusions that had drawn them together in love, only to rip them apart in war. The city's defenses, though better prepared than before, began to falter under Drogon's relentless assault. Entire sections of the wall collapsed, sending archers tumbling to their deaths. Flames licked the rooftops again, undoing years of painstaking repair. The smell of charred flesh filled the air. Jon pressed on, slashing through unsullied ranks, searching desperately for some way to end this without further carnage. He saw Daenerys descend momentarily to rally her troops. Grey Worm, bloodied but unyielding, fought at her side. Jon rushed toward them, ignoring the heat of fires, ignoring the warning shouts of his allies. He had to get close enough to speak to her, to do something. "Dany!" he roared over the din, using the name he once whispered in her ear. She glanced up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, an echo of their shared past flickered, a memory of a time when they laughed together, fought the dead side by side. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She raised her hand, and Drogon loomed overhead, jaws parted to unleash death. Jon braced himself for the inferno. Yet, something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was memory, or the lingering bond they once shared. The moment hung in the balance. From the corner of Jon's vision, an enormous scorpion bolt arced through the air, fired by a determined crew. It struck Drogon in the shoulder, piercing scale and flesh. The dragon shrieked in agony, flames spewing wildly into the sky. Daenerys cried out in dismay, her eyes going wide with panic. Drogon, enraged, thrashed in the air. His tail swept across the battlefield, sending soldiers flying. Another scorpion bolt soared, lodging in his flank. Wounded, Drogon crashed onto a section of broken wall. The ground shook with impact, dust pluming. Daenerys rushed to his side, Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied forming a protective circle. Jon tried to follow, but more Unsullied intercepted him, forcing him into a desperate sword fight. Tyrion yelled something from a distance, but Jon couldn't make it out. The scene became a roiling chaos of dust, flame, and steel. By the time Jon broke free, breathing hard, sweat and ash streaking his face, he saw Daenerys attempting to climb onto Drogon, who lay battered and bleeding. The dragon roared, trying to lift himself. Another scorpion crew, seeing their chance, aimed a bolt. Jon shouted for them to stop, maybe out of some lingering instinct to protect Daenerys from certain death, or maybe because Drogon's wounded, thrashing body could level half the city if further provoked. The bolt fired, just as Drogon lifted off with a labored flap of his wings, scattering Unsullied and friend alike. It soared under the dragon's belly, narrowly missing him. Flames erupted from Drogon's maw, setting the siege machine aflame. Daenerys clung to his back, tears streaking her cheeks as she urged him to climb higher. The wounded dragon wheeled over the battlefield, leaving a trail of blood droplets that sizzled against the stone. Jon watched her rise into the sky, a swirl of fury in her eyes. She looked down at him, and he could almost hear her thoughts. They would burn everything if they had to. Then, as if deciding the risk was too great, Daenerys turned Drogon away from the city. The beating of the dragon's wings echoed like thunder. In a matter of moments, Drogon soared across the rooftops, heading east, away from the harbor. A handful of Dothraki riders whistled to their mounts and galloped after her, while the Unsullied retreated to their boats, picking up the wounded as quickly as they could. Jon, Tyrion, Davos, and Brienne stood in disbelief, panting, armor scorched, as the remains of the Targaryen force pulled back. Smoke curled from burning ships in the bay, and the city walls were once again cracked and aflame in places. Bodies littered the battlefield. The hush of after-battle fell, broken only by the moans of the dying and the crackle of distant fires. No one was sure if Daenerys' retreat was permanent or just a regrouping. They stared at the horizon, half expecting Drogon's dark silhouette to reappear at any moment. But minutes dragged on, and no sign of the dragon returned. Jon felt an immense wave of exhaustion flood through him, overshadowing even the physical wounds he had sustained. This was the very nightmare he had hoped to avoid by banishing her, and it had come to pass. The city burned again. Lives were lost again. "She's gone," Tyrion breathed, leaning on Davos for support. "For now, at least." Jon nodded numbly. "We need to tend to the wounded. Secure the walls." His voice was hollow, mind reeling with guilt and sorrow. They did just that. Soldiers poured water on the fires, rescuing those trapped in the rubble. Healers set up makeshift triage stations in the courtyard. Lords and knights took stock of the damage. Another wave of the city lay in ruin. Families who had rebuilt their homes now saw them consumed once more. But it hadn't been as total a destruction as the first time. Daenerys had not lingered to finish the job. Whether out of caution or wounded pride or Drogon's injuries, she had departed. That night, Jon slumped against a cracked wall in what was left of the Red Keep, unable to find solace in sleep. Ghost lay at his side, wounded in the fray but still breathing. Jon gently stroked the direwolf's fur, eyes distant. He replayed every moment of the battle, trying to see if he could have stopped it. If he had seized an earlier moment to kill Daenerys, would it have saved lives? If he had not banished her, would she have settled? Or would it have simply prolonged the inevitable? His reverie was broken by Tyrion's quiet approach. The Lannister looked every inch the war-weary statesman. His fine clothes singed, hair matted with sweat. He crouched beside Jon, offering him a flask of water. Jon sipped it gratefully, then exhaled. "This was what I feared." Tyrion nodded, voice low. "We all feared it. You did everything you could to avoid it. But she has become something else, Jon. Love twisted into vengeance. There's no reasoning with that." Jon clenched his jaw. "We need to prepare for her next move. She might come back with a greater force, or maybe she'll attack another part of the realm. I feel like the only way this ends is if she—" He paused, voice catching in his throat. "If she dies." Tyrion looked down. "I thought so once, but I wanted to give her a chance to show mercy, to leave us alone. Now, after seeing that rage, perhaps you are right. But how do we do it? Even with scorpions, we barely drove her off. Dropping that beast from the sky would require perfect aim, and if we miscalculate, the city burns again." Jon felt tears sting his eyes, which he quickly blinked away. "I can't believe I'm speaking of killing her. The woman He couldn't finish. The words were too painful. Tyrion placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know. Love is the death of duty, and duty is the death of love. You did your duty once. You banished her. Now you might have to do it again. Permanently." Jon closed his eyes, feeling the crushing weight of that truth. He had sworn an oath to protect the realm. Yet, how many times could he tear out his own heart in the name of duty? Days bled into weeks again. The realm shuddered, bracing for another invasion. But Daenerys did not return. Scouts reported that her fleet limped across the sea, battered and short on supplies. Drogon was badly wounded. The new Khalasar splintered, uncertain if pursuing a war across the ocean was worth it. Some rumored that the sellswords demanded higher pay or threatened mutiny. It was said that Daenerys remained defiant, but with her dragon injured, she risked losing the loyalty of her Essos followers if she tried to push them too far. In King's Landing, the devastation was not as catastrophic as before, but it was enough to cast a pall over the city. King Bran convened a council, at which he appeared in person for the first time since the battle. His eerie calmness unsettled many, but he spoke plainly. Daenerys Targaryen remained a mortal threat to the realm, and they must make preparations to end her threat if she returned. Jon was named Protector of the Realm, a title he did not want, but one Bran insisted upon, trusting in Jon's sense of honor and the respect he commanded from the people. Tyrion and Davos remained in their positions, working tirelessly to gather intelligence, fund the city's defenses, and keep the lords united. Gendry oversaw the forging of more advanced scorpions, cunningly designed to be more accurate. Brienne trained elite archers who could fire precisely under chaotic conditions. Yara Greyjoy patrolled the coasts even more vigilantly. Yet, despite all these efforts, no further sign of Daenerys or her forces materialized. The city waited, tense. Some believed she had retreated to lick her wounds, mustering a final, larger assault that would sweep them all away. Others whispered that perhaps Drogon's injuries were too severe, that Mother and Dragon had died somewhere in the sea. Rumors flew like crows in the wind, carrying hope and dread in equal measure. A year passed. Then, too, life in its stubborn way continued. The damage from the second assault was repaired. Families returned. Crops grew outside the city walls. King Bran led with a quiet hand, focusing on justice, infrastructure, and letting local lords manage their own lands. Sansa's north remained an ally, trading grain and iron, though maintaining independence. The southern lords grew comfortable again, lulled by the absence of any real threat. But Jon Snow was never truly at ease. In quiet moments, he peered out from the battlements, scanning the sea for any sign of black wings. He rode with Ghost through the city, ensuring the watch remained disciplined. He never forgot the price of complacency. On a cool autumn evening, he stood alone on the beach outside King's Landing, the tide lapping at his boots. Ghost sniffed at shells and driftwood. Jon looked eastward across the narrow sea. The stars were bright overhead, and the half-moon cast silver light on the waves. The distant lights of passing ships glimmered. He thought of Daenerys. Where was she? Had she died? Or was she out there somewhere, plotting her return? He felt a hollowness in his chest, remembering her laughter in the north, the warmth of her smile by the hearth in Winterfell, the feel of her hand in his, all turned to ash by the fires of war. He whispered into the wind, though there was no one to hear him, "I'm sorry, Dany." The wind gave no reply, only the gentle crash of the surf. He closed his eyes, letting the sea breeze wash over him, carrying the lingering salt of distant shores. A part of him would always love her, the woman he first knew. But that Daenerys was gone, replaced by the merciless conqueror who had turned to flame and blood. Whether she lived or died, he knew the realm would never again be the same. Some wounds do not heal, and some hearts cannot mend. He opened his eyes, gazing at the horizon. There was no dragon silhouette, no sign of a returning queen. Only the endless sea, dark and deep, separating him from the ghosts of the past. And so the realm endured, haunted by the memory of the banished Targaryen and the wrath she unleashed. Whether she would re-emerge to plague Westeros once more remained an open wound, a question that lingered in every uneasy dream. In the meantime, life went on in the city. Farmers sowed and reaped, children played in the streets, blacksmiths hammered steel, and the new monarchy attempted to usher in an era of tentative peace. But for Jon Snow, each day was touched by the echo of dragon wings, each breath marred by the guilt and sorrow of having loved and lost, and for having banished the woman who bore fire and destruction in equal measure. And that is how the world stood, suspended between the memory of a dragon's fiery wrath and the fragile hope that it might never again descend upon them. Yet in the quiet corners of distant lands, Daenerys Targaryen, the exiled dragon queen, still stirred, wounded but unbroken, waiting for a day when she might reclaim what she deemed her birthright, or find some new destiny altogether, far from the broken throne of Westeros. Until that day, Jon Snow and all the realm could do only what they had always done: endure, rebuild, and pray that the deadly wrath of the Dragon Queen would never again scorch their future. If it did, they would stand ready, even if that meant the final heartbreak of putting the last dragon to rest. And in that silent acceptance lay the truth of their histories, that the wheel was never truly broken, only bent, and the shadows of old battles always lingered, waiting for a spark to ignite them once more. Jon Snow did not sleep that night. He stood on the quiet shore until the sky began to lighten, thinking of the Dragon Queen who was out there somewhere, wounded yet unbroken, like the realm itself. The bruise-colored dawn found him trudging back through the city gates, Ghost at his side, his cloak crusted with salt from the sea breeze. In these empty hours, before the city stirred, only a few guards and a handful of scavenging cats roamed the half-repaired streets. Buildings once again showed blackened scars from Daenerys' brief second assault. Timber and stone scorched, windows shattered, but the city had withstood, and for that Jon was grimly grateful. He found himself wandering to the site where the Iron Throne had once stood, that scorched courtyard littered with heaps of broken stone, where a melted ruin was all that remained of the symbol that had defined so many lives. Over the past years, the rubble had been shifted, carefully shaped into a new dais for King Bran's seat. A simpler chair of oak, carved with subtle imagery of ravens in flight. Builders had cleared enough debris to allow for open gatherings beneath a partial arch of the old ceiling. Though the place still bore the echo of great violence, it also teemed with new purpose. A seat for a king who wished not to be worshipped, but to guide. At this hour, the courtyard was deserted except for a single guard who recognized Jon and inclined his head respectfully. The man's armor was mismatched, an improvised combination of leftover Lannister plate and captured unsullied pieces from a past skirmish. Jon paused to greet him, but no words came to mind, so he merely placed a hand on the soldier's shoulder in silent acknowledgement and continued on, Ghost padding behind. He couldn't deny the presence of a dark question that haunted him. Had he done the realm any favor by banishing Daenerys instead of putting a permanent end to her campaign? If he had plunged a dagger into her heart after the destruction of King's Landing? Gods? The thought sickened him, but might it have spared lives? Might it have prevented the second raising that left more children dead? More families homeless? The nightmares of that possibility gnawed at him. Yet, to kill someone he had loved, who had once rescued him beyond the wall, fought alongside him against the undead, he could not bring himself to do it. Love had stayed his hand, or perhaps weakness, and now the realm might pay in blood if she ever returned at the height of her strength. He left the courtyard, crossing into the Red Keep's inner corridors, which stank of mortar dust and damp. Construction workers had erected a lattice of scaffolding up the walls, repairing cracks left by dragonfire and time. Muffled hammering echoed through the corridors. When he reached his small private chamber, formerly a guard's quarters, he found Tyrion already waiting for him, perched on a simple wooden stool, a candle flickering at his elbow. The Lannister's eyes were ringed with fatigue, and he wore a threadbare cloak against the early morning chill. "You're up early," Jon said, closing the door. Ghost curled in one corner, resting on a patch of stone that had grown warm from a guttering brazier. "I never went to bed," Tyrion replied, rubbing his temples. "Davos and I have been reviewing reports from Bravos and Pentos, trying to piece together Daenerys' movements. It's inconclusive, but we do have new intelligence from Volantis." Jon tensed, feeling the heaviness in the pit of his stomach coil tighter. "What have we learned?" Tyrion sighed. "A merchant ship from Volantis docked in Duskendale just 3 days ago. Its captain claims that Drogon was spotted flying near the Painted Mountains in central Essos. They say the dragon was still injured, but alive. Most rumors place Daenerys in or around Meereen, though the city itself is closed off to outsiders. We do know some freed people from Meereen speak of the true queen, returning in triumph and promise that she will lead them to glory in Westeros." Jon's gaze dropped to the floor. He had been there once, albeit briefly, in the presence of her eastern conquests. He remembered the love Daenerys had inspired among those she freed. It was easy to forget, here in Westeros, that across the sea she was revered as a liberator. "If the people there love her, they'll help her rebuild," he said, voice flat. "Find her an army, heal Drogon." Tyrion nodded grimly. "That is our worry. For now, she's too wounded, perhaps lacking enough men, to launch a third assault. But if she does rebuild, gather more Sellswords or the remnants of the Dothraki, we might see a far larger invasion in the future. She's patient when she needs to be." Jon exhaled. "Did the captain mention if she's planning to sail soon? Are there new fleets under construction in Meereen?" "Nothing definitive," Tyrion answered. "Likely too soon. But that only means we have time to fortify the realm, or time to become complacent." They exchanged a somber look, both recalling how easily entire cities could slip into complacency once the immediate threat seemed distant. Jon turned to look at Ghost, who was watching them with a keen, lupin stare. "Then we must remain vigilant," he said. "I've no taste for war, but the realm must be warned again." Tyrion gave a weary shrug. Warnings can only do so much. Some lords prefer to keep their armies close to home. They worry about bandits and petty conflicts. Many have begun to doubt Daenerys will ever return. After all, she tried twice, and each time ended up retreating with heavy losses. The lords ask, why should we bleed our coffers dry preparing for a threat that may never come? Jon clenched his fists, frustration evident. They didn't see what happened during the first attack, or they've chosen to forget. Or perhaps some of them simply trust that we can hold her off again with scorpions and archers. False comfort, Tyrion said softly. One does not simply hold off a dragon queen forever. Not if she has any measure of her old fire left. The realm learned that lesson too late the first time. A pause stretched between them. The candle guttered, sending flickers of light dancing across the walls. Finally, Tyrion rose to his feet. If you need me, I'll be in the war room with Davos. The king has asked that we compile a fresh report on any new alliances Daenerys might forge in Essos. The Triarchs of Volantis, the new Prince of Pentos, the Dothraki hordes roaming the disputed lands. Any one of them might throw in their lot with her if she promises gold and glory. Jon merely nodded. His eyes felt gritty, and his bones ached with weariness. Tyrion left quietly. Once alone, Jon sat on the edge of his narrow bed, face in his hands. He wanted to ride north, to see Winterfell again, to walk in the Godswood, to speak with Sansa and Arya and Bran as if they were siblings in a simpler time. But the North was now an independent kingdom under Sansa, and Bran, though king of the Six Kingdoms, rarely commanded in person. He relied on his council, on Jon, to keep the realm safe from the threat that Daenerys still posed. Jon knew he could not abandon that duty, no matter how heavy it weighed on his heart. Yet part of him hoped Daenerys would never return, that she would heal Drogon, find peace in the east, become a queen among the free cities, or fly beyond the red waste to lands unknown. Each time that hope rose in him, guilt followed, because he still harbored some flickering ember of love for her, and wishing she would vanish from his life entirely felt like a betrayal of what they'd once shared. But the alternative was more war, more innocent blood. He had seen enough of that. He had helped bury the bodies. With a sigh, he stood again, buckling on his sword belt. Duty would not wait. The months that followed brought a tense stillness to Westeros. The King's Court in King's Landing kept a watchful eye on every whisper out of Essos, sending ravens to Dorne, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale, urging them all to remain alert. Gendry Baratheon oversaw the final touches on improved ballista designs, stationing them on the city walls and in key coastal forts. Yara Greyjoy patrolled the waters with a renewed iron fleet, occasionally battling pirates or slavers who tested her domain. Letters arrived from Sansa, offering reassurances that the North stood ready to ride if the threat became dire. More ravens came from Tormund and the Wildlings, who had settled areas beyond the Wall and near the Gift, proclaiming that while they had little interest in southern affairs, they would fight if the dragons returned to threaten the living again. A shaky web of alliances formed from shared fear of Daenerys' vengeance. Jon attended council meetings, listened to the arguments of lords demanding lower taxes, and tried to keep them mindful that the kingdom was not truly safe. Whenever he walked the streets, small folk greeted him with courtesy or a mix of awe and fear. Some still called him the Wolf King, though he repeatedly insisted he was no king at all. Others, especially older men and women, recalled that day of unimaginable fire and destruction and saw him as the man who had banished the Dragon Queen. They still whispered prayers of gratitude that he had, in some measure, spared them a total annihilation. And so he lived in a strange reverence he never sought. He found some solace at times in the Red Keep's small library, where Samwell Tarly had briefly stayed before returning to Horn Hill. Books and scrolls were scattered across wide oak tables, many of them recounting the histories of House Targaryen. Jon's eyes lingered on illustrations of dragons, notes about the dance of the dragons, the conquests, the downfall of the Mad King. All stories seemed cyclical, as though Westeros could not escape the shadow of Targaryen power. Jon studied the texts on dragons' weak points, on the rare alchemical solutions that had been used in times long past. More than once, He had to snap himself out of a grim fascination with how to kill a dragon effectively. Yet, if Daenerys returned, he could not rely solely on scorpions and ballista bolts. There had to be a plan. Perhaps he should have sought out dragonglass, for it had once been rumored to work against mystical creatures. Then again, Drogon was no white or White Walker. He was flesh and blood, albeit shielded by thick black scales. The memory of Rhaegal's downfall at the hands of Euron Greyjoy's massive crossbows haunted him. It had been too easy that day, an ambush, and Daenerys' shock had been incalculable. Now, she would never be that careless again. The only respite from these worries came in brief moments of normalcy. A tavern reopening its doors on a newly rebuilt street, laughter drifting from fisherfolk unloading their catches by the harbor at dusk, candlelit dinners where Davos shared wry jokes about his smuggling days, and Tyrion sipped wine with a haunted look that never fully left him. It was in those moments Jon remembered that life endured, that people loved, laughed, and carried on, even when a shadow loomed over them. He clung to that fragile promise of a future that might be safe, if only Daenerys would let go of her vengeance. The second year of that tense peace bled into the third. Rumors of Daenerys had grown sporadic. No fleets appeared off the coast. A few passing ships reported glimpses of a dragon in the distance near Old Volantis, but none had seen a second attempt on Westeros. Some lords began questioning whether the realm needed to maintain such high alert. The cost of constant war readiness was wearing on them, on their levies, on their coin. King Bran, in his quiet manner, refused to stand down. Through messages delivered by ravens, he reminded them that as long as Daenerys Targaryen lived, she was a potential threat. A handful of lords grumbled behind closed doors that the king's preoccupation with a ghost threat was stifling their prosperity. Late in the autumn of that third year, a ship arrived from Lys, carrying a wounded Braavosi Sellsword who claimed to have served in a short-lived campaign under Daenerys' banner. According to this man's delirious confessions, his flesh yellow with infection from a spear cut, Daenerys had indeed tried to muster an army around Meereen, but her control over the city and the freedmen had waned when other factions began to resent her sense of entitlement. They respected what she had done in the past but balked at her insistence that her rightful place was in Westeros, a land that scorned them. Low-level skirmishes broke out in the city. The man insisted that Drogon remained alive but might never fully recover from the injuries inflicted by the scorpion bolts. Some said the dragon had grown lethargic, rarely flying more than a few leagues from Meereen's walls. Upon hearing this, Tyrion, Davos, and Jon huddled in the war room with a map of Essos spread across an oak table. Tyrion tapped the location of Meereen. If she can't rally the freedmen, she'll look elsewhere for support. The Dothraki are ever-shifting, their loyalties uncertain. Perhaps she's turned her gaze to Karth or the Basilisk Isles for fresh recruits or gold. Or maybe she's biding her time. Davos frowned, glancing at Jon. It sounds like her resources are dwindling. Sellswords are a fickle lot if the coin dries up, and if Drogon is wounded, might she be unable to mount another full-scale invasion? Jon stared at the map with unreadable eyes. She's still alive, and she has Drogon, wounded or not. I can't see her giving up her claim, no matter the cost. She'll search every corner of Essos for a chance to strike back. Tyrion traced the coastline of the Summer Sea. If she's truly weakened, might it be better to strike first? Send a small force while she's vulnerable. Finish it before she rebuilds. Jon's jaw tightened. He remembered how such a notion, killing her in her weakened state, felt treacherous, even now. You propose an invasion of Meereen? That city is thousands of miles across the narrow sea. We'd be the aggressors. Innocent freedmen might be caught in the crossfire. We'd risk a new war in a foreign land. Tyrion's mouth twisted. War is always ugly, but consider the alternative. She grows strong again. She sails here. More of our small folk burn. Do we wait for that possibility? Davos watched Jon carefully. You banished her, lad. You know her better than anyone. Do you believe she'll keep trying? Or can we trust that her injuries and losses will force her to remain in Essos? Jon let out a strained breath. Knowing Daenerys, I can't see her truly yielding what she believes is hers. She's too proud, too certain of her destiny. He paused, the next words bitter in his mouth. "But I won't lead an attack on Essos. I won't be the man who drags this realm into more bloodshed on foreign shores." "So we wait," Tyrion murmured, sounding both resigned and wary. "We wait for the next move." That was the stance they adopted. The lords and small folk alike were relieved to hear no immediate calls for a massive overseas campaign. The realm returned to a restless watchfulness, with some turning their attention to daily problems. Harvest shortages in the Reach, robber knights harassing villagers in the Riverlands, ongoing friction between the Iron Islands and certain coasts. King Bran's court handled these matters with measured care, while the possibility of Daenerys' return shifted from an urgent dread to a kind of half-forgotten rumor, a lingering phantom. Yet Jon's heart could not dismiss her so easily. In quiet hours, he revisited the past in his mind, memories of the Great War against the dead, of her steadfast courage and determination, of her heartbreak and grief, and the creeping madness that had followed. He wondered if she thought of him as often. He wondered if she ever regretted her choice to burn King's Landing, or if she blamed him for her banishment. Probably both. As the seasons cycled again, a new calm settled over King's Landing. Residences sprung up in the once devastated corners of the city. Trade routes thrived, taverns overflowed at night, and the Red Keep bustled with envoys from the north, Dorne, the Vale, eager to discuss trade or new alliances. The city was no longer the battered husk it had been. It sparkled with new paint, fresh cobblestones, a sense of cautious optimism. Tyrion ensured that taxes remained fair, encouraging commerce. Davos oversaw the navy. Gendry continued to modernize fortifications. Brienne served as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, training loyal knights. King Bran rarely appeared at public gatherings, but his decisions were firm and generally wise. Jon drifted through these times like a lone figure in a half-remembered dream. He had made no attempt to claim any new titles, despite the realm's occasional attempts to heap them on him. As protector of the realm, he was expected to maintain a presence in the capital, though his heart yearned for the frosty hills of the north. Whenever Sansa visited, they spoke intimately of family and the old days, though the subject of Daenerys always hung between them like a dark tapestry. Arya, who roamed the seas on her voyages of discovery, wrote occasional letters from exotic ports, never lingering in one place. Bran was closed in his cryptic knowledge, a king of visions who rarely confided in anyone. And then, on a crisp morning more than 4 years after Daenerys' original banishment, a ship arrived bearing an unexpected passenger. Jorah Mormont's cousin, one Meege Mormont of Bear Island, an older, battle-tested woman with a weathered face and a blunt manner. She had traveled from across the sea, evidently searching for news of Jon Snow. Guards met her at the dock and escorted her to the Red Keep. Jon, curious, went to greet her personally in a small courtyard near the gates. Meege wore a patchwork cloak of furs that looked out of place in the warmer southern climate. She recognized Jon at once from his stark features, though they had never met. Without any preamble, she said, "I've come from Essos, was searching for you, Snow, or Targaryen, whichever you call yourself these days. I bring word from someone who claims to be loyal to you." Jon's eyes narrowed. "Essos? Who is this person?" Meade shrugged. "A man calling himself Dario Naharis. He was once your queen's paramour, or so I hear. He's in Meereen and claims he must speak to Jon Snow urgently. He sent ravens to the ports of Pentos, Bravos. Somehow the message got to me. I was traveling for trade, recognized the name Stark and Snow. Thought I'd bring it to you, as I owe your family some respect." The name Dario Naharis stirred old memories. Jon recalled that Daenerys had left Dario behind in Meereen to keep the peace while she sailed to Westeros. He had never met the man, but had heard rumors. An audacious Sellsword captain with a flamboyant style and unwavering devotion to Daenerys. For Dario to reach out now, under the banner of loyalty to Jon, seemed improbable. "What does his message say?" Jon asked, voice guarded. Meege pulled out a small scroll, sealed with plain wax, no sigil. Jon broke the seal. Inside were a few lines in a bold, slanted hand. "To the one who exiled my queen, I am Dario Naharis. We have not met, but we share a connection to Daenerys Targaryen. I implore you, come to Meereen if you value her life, and perhaps your own. Her cause here falters. If Westeros is to know peace, we must speak. I will ensure your safety within these walls, as best I can. No one else can stop what is unfolding. Dario. A jolt went through Jon. He read the words again, uncertain what to make of them. Why would Dario claim that Daenerys' life was in danger? She was the one with a dragon. Unless Drogon's injuries had worsened, or local unrest threatened her hold on the city more severely than rumored. But what was Dario's angle? Was it a trap? He looked up at Meej. When did you receive this? Only a fortnight past. He wanted it delivered to you with haste, but I doubted I'd find you at Bear Island, so I sailed here. I don't know the man's motives, but he seemed earnest, in a strange way. Said something about Daenerys being consumed by bitterness and that forces within Meereen are turning against her. Rebels from within, possibly even some freedmen who resent her focus on Westeros. She's apparently ill or grieving or both. Jon took a steadying breath. The notion of Daenerys ill or in danger felt surreal. She had always seemed so indomitable. Yet 4 years of struggle could break anyone, no matter how strong. Thank you for bringing this. Will you remain in King's Landing a while? Meej snorted. I hate these southern climes, but I'll stay a bit if needed. Bear Island can manage without me. I'd like to see what you make of this message. Jon invited her inside, where Tyrion and Davos joined them to examine the letter. Tyrion read it over, expression flickering with surprise and suspicion. Dario Naharis was indeed devoted to Daenerys. So why address you, the man who banished her? Davos rubbed his grizzled beard. Maybe he thinks Jon can talk sense into her. Or maybe it's a ruse to get Jon alone in Meereen, far from any Westerosi army, so Daenerys can exact her vengeance. Jon nodded grimly. That's what I'm wondering. But if there's any truth to her being in danger, we need to know what it means for the realm. If someone else in Essos topples her, will they claim the dragon for themselves or kill Drogon? Will they come after Westeros with a different ambition? Tyrion's gaze turned inward. If Daenerys were truly overthrown in Meereen, chaos would ensue. We might even see the city revert to slavers. The freedmen might fight for their autonomy, or new warlords could seize power. Could be catastrophic. And if Daenerys is at the heart of it, I can see why Dario might call for you. He might believe you're the only one who can reason with her, or the only one who can end her gracefully. Jon's stomach roiled. The idea of traveling across the sea to meet the exiled Dragon Queen felt like stepping into a prophecy of doom. Yet, he also felt the pull of responsibility. His banishment had set her on this path, and if there was any chance of brokering peace, or ensuring she never returned with vengeance, perhaps he had a duty to see it through. Davos eyed him warily. If you go, it must be done carefully. You can't just sail alone into Meereen. The city could be a death trap. But if you bring a large host, it might provoke Daenerys into attacking, or it might spook the local factions into open warfare. This is delicate. Tyrion nodded in agreement. We should consider sending envoys first. Or at least gather more intelligence. Dario's word alone isn't much to go on. Jon studied the short note again, the words echoing in his mind. If Westeros is to know peace, we must speak. He thought of the uncertain years since Daenerys had left. He thought of all the families living in fear that the Dragon Queen might return. If this truly was a chance to end it one way or another, did he have the right to ignore it? His voice was heavy when he spoke. I'll do it. I'll go to Meereen and see for myself. If Daenerys is truly vulnerable, we might be able to negotiate a final peace or stop her from ever returning to Westeros in fire and blood. The words felt like an anvil in his chest. Tyrion shot him a sharp look. You'd risk your life on Dario's cryptic summons? Jon answered quietly. If there's a chance to spare the realm another war, yes. Davos folded his arms. Then you won't go alone, that much is certain. You'll need a small escort. Loyal men who won't jeopardize a peace talk, but can protect you if things go sour. Jon nodded. A small escort. Maybe a handful of skilled fighters. Not enough to start a war, but enough to ensure I'm not an easy prisoner." Tyrion pressed his lips thin. "As Hand of the King, I can't stop you, but I advise caution. We should inform King Bran, see if he has any visions of this that might guide us." Jon replied, "Do so, but I suspect Bran will say this is my choice. He rarely imposes direct commands." And indeed, when they consulted King Bran, the young man in the wheelchair gazed at them with distant eyes and said only, "The choice is yours, Jon. You know what is at stake. The realm must be protected. I see many paths, some shrouded in shadow. But if your heart compels you to go, then go. A new journey might yield new truths." That was all the king offered. No prophecy, no sure knowledge of success or doom. Jon found the lack of clarity both unnerving and strangely freeing. Within a fortnight, the arrangements were made. A modest vessel, the Iron Grace, was prepared at the harbor. Yara Greyjoy's people had outfitted it for speed rather than heavy warfare. Jon chose a small retinue of 10, including a few seasoned knights and archers plus Davos, who volunteered, citing his experience in foreign ports, and 2 of the elite Kingsguard that Brienne trusted implicitly. Tyrion was torn about accompanying them, but in the end decided his presence might incite old wounds with Daenerys, and it would also leave the realm's governance short-handed. So Tyrion stayed behind, bidding Jon farewell on the quayside one brisk morning as the gulls wheeled overhead. Ghost paced along the deck, uneasy in the shifting environment of a ship. "You're mad to do this," Tyrion said, his tone laced with concern but also a hint of admiration. "But I understand why you must. Try not to die, Jon Snow. The realm still needs you." Jon clasped Tyrion's forearm. "I'm not sure the realm needs me, but I'll do my best to stay alive, for all our sakes." With that, the Iron Grace pushed away from the dock, sails catching the cold sea wind. They curved out of Blackwater Bay, past the rocky coastline, and into open waters. The journey to Meereen would be long. Across the narrow sea, down through the Stepstones or near Lys, and into Slaver's Bay, a route that spelled potential dangers. Pirates, storms, uncertain welcomes. Yet, Jon felt a grim resolve in his chest. This was the only way to end the gnawing question of Daenerys Targaryen, or to be ended by it. In the first week at sea, the weather proved mercifully calm. The autumn breeze carried them swiftly southeast, and the Iron Grace cut through the waves with a sure prow. Davos, while once a smuggler well accustomed to rough journeys, still found reasons to grumble about the dryness of the rations and the unpredictability of the winds. Jon, who had never much liked sea voyages, spent most of his time on deck, gazing at the horizon, Ghost always near. The direwolf disliked the rocking motion, but he refused to stay in the hold. Some of the sailors eyed Ghost with apprehension, yet they were quickly won over by Davos's reassurances that the creature was loyal and by Jon's calm presence. At night, Jon found sleep elusive. He would doze fitfully in his hammock, dreaming of dragons perched on the masts, or of Daenerys lying wounded in some shadowed corridor, calling his name. Often, he woke with a start, heart hammering, the memory of her eyes or her fiery breath filling his mind. Did she dream of him as well, or had her hatred replaced all memory of their love? He had no answers, only the hush of the open sea under the starlight. On the 10th day, they approached the outskirts of the Stepstones, a chain of islands known for pirate activity. Yara's instructions had been to hug the coastline of Dorne, then cross over in a wide arc, where it was said the pirate dens were fewer. They kept watch day and night with archers ready. Indeed, a few suspicious sails were spotted trailing them for a time, but when the Iron Grace displayed its standard, a direwolf sigil combined with the crowned tree of King Bran, the trailing ships drew back, uncertain of tangling with a royal vessel. By the 20th day, they had slipped into the warm currents of the summer sea, the air growing humid, the gulls giving way to exotic seabirds. Davos pointed out the star patterns at night, remarking how different they appeared from the vantage of White Harbor or the Blackwater. Jon found himself drenched in sweat by midday, longing for the crisp breezes of the north. On the 25th day, they docked briefly at New Guise for water and supplies. Jon had never set foot in this part of the world. The port was a bustle of commerce, spices, dyed fabrics, exotic creatures in cages. The men and women wore loose, brightly colored robes. The architecture was a blend of ancient brick and fresh plaster. Jon took in the sights with wary eyes, mindful that the city once thrived on slavery. Despite Daenerys' efforts, vestiges of that practice lingered in back alleys and hidden compounds. In a dingy tavern near the docks, they encountered a sallow-faced corsair who recognized Jon's retinue as foreigners bound for Meereen. He sneered, "You'll find trouble there. The city's torn by rebellions, factions warring among themselves. That dragon queen has lost favor, so they say. Half the freedmen see her as a false savior who cares more for conquering faraway lands. Others still worship her. Bloody riots at night." He shook his head. "If you value your hides, you'd best stay at sea." Jon exchanged a glance with Davos. The news, though not entirely unexpected, confirmed Dario's hints of turmoil. They pressed the corsair for more details, but the man only spat on the floor and muttered that any fool who went to Meereen these days deserved what they got. Taking his warning to heart, they returned to the Iron Grace. The next leg of the journey carried them north along the coast of Slaver's Bay. Though Daenerys had tried to erase that name, it persisted among the locals. They passed Astapor, where crumbling pyramids and burnt-out quarters stood as testament to the city's changing fortunes over the years. Jon recalled hearing how Daenerys had once conquered Astapor with cunning, freeing the Unsullied, only for the city to fall into chaos after she left. The region's shifting alliances had never stabilized, and new warlords had come and gone like the tides. Finally, on the 30th day since leaving King's Landing, they drew near Meereen. Even from leagues away, the Great Pyramid rose above the skyline, a massive structure that dwarfed the rest of the city. The ring of smaller pyramids and tall spires encircled it, creating a distinctive silhouette in the hazy afternoon sun. Once, those pyramids had been the seat of the city's wealthy masters, who ruled through slavery and fear. Daenerys had toppled that regime, only to face rebellions, discontent, and conflict after her departure for Westeros. Now the city might be in more turmoil than ever. A hush fell over the crew as they neared the harbor. The water was a flat turquoise, and the battered remnants of a breakwater jutted out from the city's main port. Everywhere were signs of partial repair. Scaffolding on the older walls, new stone sections incongruously grafted onto ancient structures. The harbor itself bristled with ships of all kinds, from broad merchant barges to slender fishing vessels and a handful of war galleys. Jon scanned the sky, half expecting to see Drogon circling, but it was empty, a wide expanse of pale blue. They displayed a white banner of peace as they drew into the port, uncertain how they would be received. Some watchers on the docks eyed them curiously, a few with open suspicion, but no immediate hostility greeted them. As they moored, a cluster of armed men approached, brandishing spears and curved daggers. Their garb was a mixture of local mercenary uniforms, freedmen militias, and ragged city guards. Jon disembarked with Davos and the others, his heart pounding. Ghost leapt to the quay, hackles raised, sniffing the foreign scents in the air. A tall, wiry man in battered armor stepped forward, speaking the local tongue. Davos, who knew a smattering of it, replied that they came under truce to meet Daario Naharis. The guard frowned, gesturing for them to wait. Another man sprinted off, presumably to fetch someone in charge. Around them, sailors and dockworkers paused in their tasks to stare at the newcomers. Jon's group waited tensely. He felt the heat pressing down, sweat trickling along his spine. Davos muttered under his breath that it would be just their luck to be surrounded and butchered before they even saw the city's interior. But soon, the runner returned with a company of men wearing the standard of the Stormcrows, the mercenary company Daario once led. At their head was a man with a flamboyant mustache and curly hair, bright clothes that seemed mismatched with the grim expression on his face. "Friends," he called in the common tongue. "Or perhaps not friends, but we shall see. You are Jon Snow, I presume." Jon inclined his head. "I am. And you must be Daario Naharis." Daario gave a broad, wolfish smile. "The same." He glanced at Ghost, arching an eyebrow. "I see you brought a large hound. "He's no hound," Jon replied quietly. "He's a direwolf from the north." "Wonderful. I've never met a direwolf," Dario said, though his tone carried little of the swagger one might expect from a man known for bold charm. Instead, he seemed weary. He turned to his men and spoke quickly in their language, instructing them to stand down. Then, to Jon, "I sent word for you because Meereen is on the edge of collapse. Daenerys Targaryen, your queen, once. She's—" He paused, wrestling with words. "She's not well, in mind or body, and the city is fracturing around her." Jon felt a pang in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Why ask for me?" Dario exhaled. "Because she trusts no one else. She's barely lucid some days, raving about how Westeros betrayed her, how you—" He stopped. "She's locked herself in the Great Pyramid with only a handful of loyalists. Drogon roosts on the top, roaring at all hours. The Freedmen's faction is furious, claiming she's abandoned them for dreams of a foreign crown. The old families that remain want her gone. My Stormcrows are caught in the middle. She pays us with what little wealth remains, but it's not enough to keep the city stable. If she dies, or if the rebels storm the pyramid, it will be a bloodbath." Jon stared at him, mind spinning. "What do you expect me to do?" Dario shrugged helplessly. "I have no illusions. Maybe you can talk sense into her, or finish her off if you must. Gods know I don't want her dead. But this can't go on. I've tried to get through to her, but she sees me as a reminder of her old conquests, an echo of a life she left behind. She speaks only of dragons and destiny, or curses your name for casting her out. She might try to kill you, or maybe you can heal the wounds, find some middle ground. I don't know. But if you do nothing, the city will tear itself apart." Jon's retinue listened, shifting uneasily. Davos cleared his throat. "We came here in good faith. But if she's truly mad with hatred, can we even hope for reason?" Dario's eyes gleamed with a forlorn hope. "She's not entirely gone. I've seen glimmers of the woman I followed. She's just consumed by sorrow and pain. Drogon, too, is in constant agony from his wounds. The city hears his roars day and night. Perhaps if she sees you, if you offer some path to redemption or peace, it might calm her. Or at least limit the destruction." Jon closed his eyes briefly. This was what he had feared and expected. A broken queen, a wounded dragon, a city on the brink. "Very well," he said at last. "Take me to her, but my men come as well. I won't walk into the pyramid unguarded." Dario nodded. "Of course, I'll do my best to keep you safe, but I can make no promises once you're face to face. She still commands Drogon, however wounded he is." His voice turned grim. "He's killed 12 men in the past month alone when they dared come too close. The freedmen call him the Winged Tyrant." The group set forth into Meereen. The streets were hotter and dustier than Jon remembered from his fleeting time in Essos. He noticed signs of wealth, vibrant tapestries, bold graffiti on walls praising or condemning Daenerys, but also pockets of squalor, collapsed buildings left to rot, clusters of children begging. Armed militias roved in packs, glaring at one another across intersections. Dario led them through winding alleys to avoid trouble, though the tension was palpable. More than once, Jon and Davos exchanged glances, hands drifting to sword hilts. Eventually, they emerged into a grand plaza fronting the Great Pyramid. Statues lay toppled, the stone, scarred by what looked like dragon fire. The pyramid's monumental staircase rose before them, flanked by columns carved with depictions of the city's old gods. Perched near the top, Jon glimpsed the hulking form of Drogon, black scales dull, tattered wings folded. Even at a distance, he could hear the dragon's ragged breathing, see the scorpion scar gouges along his flank. The beast looked thinner than Jon remembered, yet still terrifyingly immense. As they ascended the steps, Jon's heart thudded in his chest. Memories of her first triumphant entrance in Westeros flooded his mind. Daenerys astride Drogon, the city cowering. Now he beheld a battered fortress, not entirely different from King's Landing after her wrath. History repeating, he thought grimly. Will we ever break free of this cycle? At the top landing, more guards stood watch. Dario signaled them aside. One was an unsullied, his face impassive, though his armor was older, battered from many fights. He recognized Jon with a flicker of hostility. Jon sensed that any sign of threat would result in immediate violence. Tension hung in the air like a drawn bowstring as they passed into the pyramid's interior, a cavernous hall lined with marble columns. Torches flickered, revealing cracks in the walls, scorch marks, scattered debris. Dario guided them along a corridor that led deeper into the structure, toward what once served as a throne room. Stay alert, he advised quietly. She may not be alone. Some fanatics worship her like a living goddess. Others want her dead. We Stormcrows keep a perimeter, but it's a sieve. They paused at a tall set of bronze doors guarded by two freedmen in piecemeal armor. The men eyed Jon suspiciously, but Dario convinced them to open the doors. Beyond was a sprawling chamber with high ceilings. At the far end stood a dais topped by a simple seat of polished stone. Tattered tapestries of House Targaryen's dragon sigil draped the walls, caked in dust. Braziers cast a dim, flickering glow over the floor, which was strewn with rushes that had not been changed in some time. And there, seated on the stone seat, was Daenerys Targaryen. Jon stopped in his tracks, every thought scattering like crows. She wore a threadbare black gown, her silver-gold hair unkempt, braided in half-hearted loops that hung disheveled around her shoulders. Her face was thinner than he remembered, gaunt, her cheeks hollowed. Shadows pooled beneath her eyes, which burned with an intensity that verged on delirium. She looked at Jon without immediate recognition, as though she were seeing a ghost. A moment of profound silence stretched between them. Jon could feel his pulse hammering, and behind him, his men and Davos tensed. Dario stood off to the side, wary. Daenerys's hands gripped the arms of the throne, knuckles white. Her lips parted, but no words emerged at first. Finally, her voice, once commanding and clear, emerged cracked and raw. "You came back." Jon forced himself to step forward, ignoring how his heart twisted. "I did." She let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Are you here to gloat? To finish what you began? Banishing me, leaving me to rot in this endless ruin?" Jon swallowed hard. "I'm here because Dario wrote that you were in danger, and that Meereen is on the edge of chaos." She eyed Dario with a flicker of anger, then turned that anger onto Jon. "Danger? Chaos? All of it is your fault. You took my throne, turned my armies against me, left me bleeding." She rose from her seat, stepping closer. Jon's men instinctively closed ranks behind him, but Jon gestured for them to hold. Her posture was stiff, and he noticed a limp in her left leg, as though old wounds still plagued her. Yet the old regal bearing lingered. "You come with swords and banners, again telling me what is right? I should let Drogon burn you where you stand." Jon's throat tightened. He could almost feel the searing heat of dragon fire, but he kept his voice steady. "Then why haven't you?" For a beat, her eyes flicked about the chamber, as if searching for answers in the shadows. In them, he saw confusion, longing, hatred, and something else, perhaps a memory of who they were. She took a trembling breath. I don't know." Dario, from the sidelines, cleared his throat gently. "Your Grace, I brought him here because this strife in Meereen cannot continue. The freedmen are turning against you. The old families conspire to overthrow you. Stormcrows can't hold the city on our own. Drogon is wounded, no matter how bravely he tries to protect you. You cannot keep fighting both Westeros and Meereen." Daenerys regarded Dario with a glare of betrayal, but she didn't lash out physically. Her gaze slid back to Jon. "So you want me to what? Apologize? Beg for scraps of your mercy? Westeros cast me aside. My birthright was stolen. I will not surrender." Jon felt a flicker of anger, remembering the countless innocents who died when she burned King's Landing, but also sadness at how lost she seemed. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. It's about the people in this city who are suffering. It's about your own survival. Dario said you're ill, that you refuse to see a healer. Her eyes flared. I'm not ill. I'm tired. She swayed slightly, and the tension in the room spiked. Jon almost reached out to steady her, but he knew that might be taken as an affront by her or her guards. Instead, he took another step closer, softly. You're exhausted from endless war, he said, voice gentle but firm. Daenerys, this has to stop. You came here to break chains, and instead you've bound yourself to a cycle of violence. Let it end. Release this city from your claim, and in return, we can find a way to keep you safe. We can prevent another uprising. She stared at him, a tremor passing through her frame. Safe, she echoed in a voice thick with irony. Would you keep me in a gilded cage? Or perhaps you want me to sail away again, vanish into the sunset so you can rule in peace. Jon's mouth felt dry. I don't rule, he said quietly. Bran is king in Westeros. The North is independent under Sansa. I have no crown, but I came here to see if there's any chance at peace. Because if you persist in claiming the Seven Kingdoms, you'll bring war to your doorstep again. She barked a harsh laugh. And what do I have to claim it with, Jon Snow? Look around you. My city rots. My dragon bleeds. My armies are gone. My own people despise me. Even if I wanted to sail west, do you think I have the strength left to do it? Jon lowered his head, acknowledging the bitter truth of her words. Then you can stay here and let the city tear you apart, or you can accept a different path. Abdicate any claim to Westeros, focus on healing Meereen if that's your will, or leave it to the freedmen if they want to govern themselves. We can arrange safe passage to somewhere else. Volantis, perhaps, or beyond. She shook her head slowly, tears threatening to spill. I wanted to save them, she whispered. I wanted to save everyone. Instead, I burned them, and now the world wants to burn me in return. He stepped closer still, his voice trembling. It doesn't have to end in flames. Let us help you. She looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time since his arrival, and a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her features. He saw flickers of the woman he once fell in love with. The fierce idealist, the breaker of chains, the one who inspired devotion and passion. And he saw the torment of betrayal, the bitterness of losing her dream, the guilt of monstrous actions that could never be undone. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, a massive roar shattered the tense silence. Drogon's cry reverberated through the chamber, a thunderous, pained bellow that rattled the pillars. Dust trickled from the ceiling. The black dragon tore at the top of the pyramid with his claws, either in agony or rage. The freedmen guards recoiled, some covering their ears. Dario cursed under his breath. Ghost flattened his ears, growling uneasily. Jon felt a surge of dread. An injured dragon was even more unpredictable, especially if it sensed Daenerys' distress. Daenerys looked upward, anguish twisting her face. He's in pain, she murmured. I can feel it. The wounds never truly healed. They fester and torment him. She stumbled, and Jon instinctively reached out, steadying her by the arm. She didn't pull away, but her breath came in shallow gasps. He'll kill this whole city if they keep prodding him. Dario took a few steps forward. They do more than prod. The rebels hurl spears at him from rooftops, hoping to finish him off. Some claim a dead dragon's bones fetch a fortune in certain markets. Daenerys looked at Jon with eyes brimming with tears, her voice trembling. Everything I built is crumbling. Is this the fate of all Targaryens? To see our dreams burn and our dragons die. Jon remembered the words of Maester Aemon, how Targaryens often felt alone in the world, living tragedies of fire and blood. He fought to keep his voice steady. It doesn't have to be Daenerys. We can find a way to save Drogon to end this fighting. But you must let go of your claim on Westeros and find peace here or elsewhere. She swallowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. And what peace will I have, knowing you banished me, that my birthright is gone? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. I know I took that from you. I'll never be free of that guilt. But I swear, if we can end this, we'll do all we can to help Drogon recover, help you live. I don't want more bloodshed." For a long moment, she said nothing, struggling with emotion. Then she nodded, just once, a tiny, fragile gesture, as though she were still uncertain. "You can try to help him, but if this is some trick," Dario interjected gently. "It's no trick, Your Grace. I brought him here for a reason." Daenerys's breath shuddered. "Very well. Show me how you intend to save my dragon, and after we shall speak of peace." Jon nodded, feeling a spark of tentative hope. "Let's see his wounds. We have a skilled healer among our group, and I've studied some texts on dragons. There may be salves we can use." She gave a dismissive wave, yet it was not outright refusal. "Fine, but we must act quickly. Drogon's temper grows worse each day." Without further delay, Jon's company readied themselves. While Davos led their designated healer to fetch the salves and bandages they'd brought, Jon accompanied Daenerys and Dario up the winding passages that led to the pyramid's roof. The climb was slow. Daenerys's limp became more pronounced. Ghost and the other guards kept wary eyes on the surroundings. The walls were cracked, some areas open to the hot wind. Echoes of Drogon's deep growls vibrated through the stone. When they emerged onto the top level, Jon's lungs seized at the pungent smell of dragon musk and the tang of old blood. Drogon lay curled near a collapsed portion of roof, his black scales dull, pitted with wounds that oozed a viscous fluid. His wings twitched, tattered membranes flapping occasionally in the warm gusts. He raised his massive head at their approach, letting out a low, warning hiss that revealed fangs the size of swords. Daenerys stepped forward carefully, lifting a hand. "Shoo, my child, it's all right." Her voice, though hoarse, carried that soothing tone that had once tamed dragons. Drogon's eyes, molten gold, focused on her, and he let out a ragged exhalation. She touched his neck where the largest scorpion scar marred his scales. He rumbled, shifting painfully. Jon could see how the plates of Drogon's hide had separated slightly at the edges of the wound, infection festering beneath. The once fearsome creature was half-starved, the ridges of his spine protruding. A wave of pity washed over Jon, mingled with dread. Here was the last living dragon of House Targaryen, a majestic beast laid low by war and vengeance. Their healer, a grizzled man named Morris, approached with trembling caution, carrying a sack of medicinal supplies. "I've never tended a dragon," he murmured, "but I know how to cleanse a wound. Let's pray he doesn't roast me." Daenerys nodded curtly. "Be gentle. He's in pain." Morris set to work, aided by two of Jon's knights who'd removed their gauntlets. They unpacked clay jars of pungent ointments, linen bandages, instruments for cleaning wounds. Daenerys stayed close to Drogon's head, murmuring soothing words in Valyrian. The great dragon occasionally snarled or twitched, but Daenerys calmed him with an outstretched hand. Jon assisted where he could, though his knowledge was rudimentary. He offered water to rinse away pus and guided Morris's hands at times. Dario stood back, arms crossed, scanning the skies as though expecting an attack at any moment. It was messy, grueling work. The stench of infection made some men gag. Twice, Drogon flailed, nearly knocking them off the roof. Each time, Daenerys risked her own safety to press her hand to Drogon's snout, whispering endearments in the old tongue. Watching her, Jon remembered how effortlessly she had once ridden the dragon into battle. Now she was desperate just to keep him alive. As the sun set behind distant dunes, they finished cleaning and dressing the worst of the wounds. Morris created a makeshift poultice to stave off further infection. They had only so many supplies, but it was a start. Daenerys laid a trembling hand on Drogon's flank, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, though Jon wasn't sure if she addressed him, the healer, or some absent god. Exhaustion weighed on them all. Dario recommended they retreat indoors to rest. Jon suggested Daenerys follow, but she shook her head. "I'll stay with him tonight. He needs me." Jon didn't argue. Instead, he nodded to Dario, who quietly led Jon and the others back down to a broad corridor where a pair of rooms had been hastily prepared with bedding and water. Soldiers of the Stormcrows guarded the door. Before parting, Dario clasped Jon's arm. "This is the first time she's let anyone help Drogon in months. You broke through. Perhaps there's hope." Jon gave a faint nod, though inside he felt only a vast weariness. "I'll speak with her tomorrow about next steps. If she's willing to reason, we might avert a civil war here." Dario looked unconvinced. "She's proud, stubborn, but maybe the memories of what you once shared will soften her." Jon swallowed the lump in his throat. Maybe. That night, lying on a makeshift pallet, Jon drifted into a fitful sleep. He dreamt of a throne room made of ice, where Daenerys stood with Drogon coiled around her, hissing. She beckoned Jon forward, but each step he took caused the ice floor to crack beneath him. He tried to speak, but no words came. Then the dragon roared, and the entire scene dissolved into black water. Jon woke with a start, heart hammering, the memory of Daenerys' haunted face lingering behind his eyelids. Morning arrived with a harsh dawn. Dario fetched Jon and Davos, guiding them back to the throne room. Daenerys was there, though she looked no less exhausted. A bowl of stale water sat untouched beside her. Her hair clung to her brow in damp locks from the heat, yet her gaze was more alert than before, fixed on Jon as he approached. Ghost padded beside him, drawing uncertain stares from the freedman guards. "So," Daenerys began, voice still rough, "Drogon rested better than he has in weeks. He's calmer." Her tone softened fractionally. "Thank you." Jon inclined his head. "I'm glad." She gestured for him to come closer. Davos stayed behind, scanning the chamber for threats. Jon walked until only a few paces separated him from her. Dario lingered off to one side, arms folded. Daenerys took a breath. "Last night, I thought a great deal about everything. My time in Westeros, my banishment, your betrayal." She paused as Jon flinched at the word. "But also the losses I suffered, my own mistakes, the blood spilled because I refused to yield. I dreamed of all the people I wanted to save, the chains I wanted to break." She closed her eyes briefly, a flicker of sorrow distorting her features. "I wonder now if I was ever truly the breaker of chains, or just another tyrant." Jon's throat tightened. "You were never just a tyrant. You did free many from slavery. You fought for the living against the dead. You tried to bring justice. But you lost your way." She opened her eyes, their violet depths glimmering with tears. "You speak as though I might still find it again. But how, Jon? My name is cursed in Westeros, and now even here my people turn against me. I am the last Targaryen queen, stripped of my throne. Where do I belong?" He hesitated, carefully picking his words. "You can belong here in Meereen if that's what you choose, so long as you rule justly and let these people decide their own fate. Or you can leave Meereen to its own governance, find another place to live in peace. The world is large. If you swear never to claim the Iron Throne again, Westeros won't come for you. We can broker a truce, sign pacts with the Freedmen Council. Let the city elect its own leaders, as you once considered." Daenerys' voice quavered. "And what would I be then? A powerless exile? My father was the Mad King. My brother was an ambitious fool. I tried to be something better, but in the end, I burned a city. Perhaps madness is in my blood as well." Jon felt a pang in his chest. He reached out, gently covering her hand with his. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "We all have darkness in us. The question is whether we let it consume us. You can choose to do better now." She stared at his hand on hers, tears falling. "Why do you still care if I'm consumed, after all I did?" He swallowed, remembering their shared battles, their nights in Winterfell, the curve of her smile when she first saw him resurrected from an icy plunge to kill whites. "Because I once loved you," he said softly, "and part of me can't bear to see you lost forever." A ragged sound escaped her, half sob, half laugh. Jon Snow, always the stubborn fool. She drew a shaky breath. "But I appreciate your honesty." For a moment, silence wrapped them in a fragile connection, while Dario and Davos exchanged uneasy glances. Then Daenerys pulled her hand free, dashing away her tears. Her gaze hardened with resolve, an echo of the queen she had once been, but tempered by weariness. "I will consider relinquishing my claim to Westeros," she said in a low voice, "but only if Meereen is stabilized first. Cannot leave it in utter chaos, and I won't let the freedmen be subjugated again. If we can broker a formal agreement with the city's factions, if Drogon can recover enough to no longer be threatened, then perhaps I'll sail away to some other corner of the world. Or remain here if they'll have me." Jon nodded, relief warring with caution. "I'll help in any way I can. Davos is skilled at negotiations. We have supplies, coin. We can assist." She took a faltering step toward the dais. "Dario, you will send word to the Freedmen Council and the old families. Summon them. Let them know I wish to negotiate a truce, under the mediation of Jon Snow." Dario bowed, a flicker of hope lighting his features. "Yes, Your Grace." Davos stepped forward, clearing his throat politely. "I can draft terms and treaties if that helps. We'll need to ensure security at any gathering, or the rebels might try to assassinate you or Drogon. Perhaps we can hold it in a neutral space." Daenerys closed her eyes as if the thought exhausted her. "A neutral space, yes. Not inside the pyramid. They hate me here." She looked at Jon, something like trust mingling wit. Lingering sorrow. "If you can ensure my safety, I will come. But if they betray me, Drogon will burn them." Jon's jaw tensed. "We'll do everything we can to avoid that." So began the delicate dance of forging a peace in Meereen. Over the next weeks, Jon and Davos worked alongside Dario and certain freedmen leaders to arrange a summit. Word spread that the Dragon Queen was willing to negotiate her exit from political power in Meereen, provided the freedmen kept their autonomy and ended hostilities. Some lauded this move as wise, others saw it as a ploy. Rebel factions demanded proof of her sincerity, demanding that she disarm the Stormcrows and any loyal Unsullied. Daenerys, though reluctant, agreed to reduce her guard, trusting Jon's small retinue to maintain order alongside a neutral freedman militia. They chose a wide courtyard near the city's heart, formerly a marketplace of sorts, now half-ruined. Workers cleared debris, erected canopies for shade, and set up long tables. Drogon loomed on a nearby rooftop, still convalescing. Each day, Morris and the others tended his wounds, applying salves. The infection gradually receded, though the dragon's flight remained limited. At night, his roars shook the city, but there was less rage in his voice and more the simple pain of a recuperating beast. The Freedmen's Council, led by a woman named Naya, agreed to attend the summit. So did remnants of the old masters, though many had fled or been killed in earlier conflicts. Those who remained were desperate to avoid further war. Daenerys insisted on personally attending, though she would not sit on any throne. Jon stood by her side as a mediator, with Davos carefully writing down the proposed terms. That the freedmen would govern themselves with a council of elected representatives, that no one could reinstate slavery under penalty of death, and that Daenerys would step aside from ruling Meereen. In exchange, she would be offered safe conduct and a pledge that neither side would harm Drogon. The city would be allowed to function independently. Dario's Stormcrows, once the Queen's personal mercenary force, would remain for a set number of months to keep order during the transition, after which they could either disband or go elsewhere. Negotiations were tense. Many freedmen saw Daenerys as an oppressive symbol who had promised them a better future and then abandoned them for Westeros. Others remembered her as the one who toppled the slavers' rule. The old families harbored deep grudges and fear of her dragon. Daenerys herself bristled when accusations of tyranny were leveled at her, and more than once Jon had to step between her and an enraged freedman or suspicious noble. The memory of the city's ruin hovered over every exchange, but Jon's presence acted as a moderating influence. Even those who despised Daenerys saw that the exiled Targaryen had come with a modest retinue, apparently sincere in wanting peace. As the summit reached a critical juncture, a rumor spread that a band of zealots planned to assassinate Daenerys with a poison-laced dart. Davos discovered the plot through a contact in the marketplace. Jon confronted the conspirators, capturing them with the help of Dario's men before they could strike. When the Freedmen Council realized Jon had protected Daenerys from within their ranks, it sent a signal that his desire to end bloodshed was genuine. Trust, albeit fragile, began to grow. Meanwhile, Daenerys spent her days alternating between the negotiations and tending to Drogon, who continued to heal. Each time Jon saw her stooped by the dragon's side, applying a salve or speaking softly in Valyrian, he felt an ache of old affection. They shared few private moments, but on occasion they spoke quietly at night in the pyramid corridors. She told him of her loneliness, how each friend she'd trusted had died or betrayed her. He reminded her that Tyrion had tried to serve her loyally until he could no longer justify her actions, but she scoffed that off. However, he could see that bitterness was no longer her only emotion. She was tired of hatred. She wanted to rest, to find some measure of peace. Gradually, terms solidified. Daenerys would formally renounce her claim to Meereen's throne. A freedmen's council, with input from the city's other factions, would govern. She would remain in Meereen for a short transitional period, no more than 3 months, under strict conditions that her forces not interfere with city governance. After that, she would depart voluntarily, taking Drogon if he was well enough to fly. If not, she would arrange safe passage by ship. The freedmen pledged not to harm her or her dragon unless she violated the agreement. There would be restitution for families harmed during the conflict, funded by leftover Targaryen gold. Jon and Davos would remain as observers, ensuring neither side broke the terms. On the final day of negotiations, Daenerys stood before the assembled crowd in the courtyard. The Freedmen's Council members, the old family's representatives, Dario's Stormcrows, Jon, Davos, and dozens of onlookers gathered under the scorching sun. Daenerys' posture was stiff but dignified, her once fine clothing carefully mended. The hush was profound as she raised her voice, which trembled only slightly. I came to Meereen to break the chains of slavery. I believed I could remake this city in my image, that I could be your savior. Instead, I brought war, strife, and pain. I left you to chase a throne across the sea, and I failed you. Today, I renounce my claim to Meereen. You are free to rule yourselves. I ask only that you uphold the promise of freedom for all. A ripple of astonishment passed through the crowd. Some stared with open resentment, others with cautious relief. Daenerys turned, her voice lower now, though still audible. I also renounce my claim to the Iron Throne of Westeros. I acknowledge that the houses of that land have chosen another king. The Targaryen line ends with me, and I will not visit Westeros again. Her words seemed to echo in Jon's mind, final and tragic. He studied her face, etched with sorrow and acceptance. This was the ultimate letting go of the dream that had defined her life. As the freedmen murmured among themselves, Daenerys stepped down from the small dais, her shoulders trembling. Jon was at her side in an instant, offering his arm for support. She did not shrug him off. The council's head, Naya, cleared her throat. We accept your abdication. We will govern Meereen for ourselves as free people. In respect of your role in ending slavery and the negotiations leading to peace, we offer you a safe stay until your departure. She spoke stiffly, but not unkindly. May we avoid further bloodshed. Daenerys nodded, tears glimmering but unshed. May it be so. Dario stepped forward, leading a small applause that spread hesitantly through the crowd. Some freedmen joined, though many glared in silence. Jon glanced around, tension still thick. Peace was a fragile thing, hammered out on an anvil of grudges. But it was real. He felt a surge of relief swirl with heartbreak for what Daenerys had surrendered. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Daenerys and Jon stood on a balcony of the Great Pyramid, gazing out at Meereen's skyline. Torchlit streets, crumbling statues, the fires of cooking hearths. A breeze ruffled Daenerys' hair. Ghost dozed at Jon's feet. She spoke softly. I thought I would feel empty, but it's as though a weight has lifted. No more pretense of being a queen. No more endless war councils. I'm nobody. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're somebody," Jon said gently. "You're Daenerys Stormborn, a woman who changed the course of history in 2 continents, who freed countless souls from bondage, who fought the army of the dead at Winterfell. That won't vanish just because you renounced your claims." She leaned on the balcony rail, looking weary beyond her years. "Where will I go, Jon? Essos is vast, but so many here either fear or resent me now. Westeros is closed to me. Maybe I'll sail east, beyond the Red Waste, to lands unknown. Or perhaps I'll stay in some quiet corner of Essos, raising goats." She gave a small, fragile smile. "Can you picture me tending goats?" A faint smile tugged at Jon's lips. "I can picture you doing anything you set your mind to." She looked at him, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her eyes. "What about you? Will you remain here until I leave, or return to your precious realm?" He sighed. "I promise to oversee the transition, and I'd like to ensure Drogon is well enough not to die in some back alley. After that, perhaps I'll go home to the north. I don't belong in courts or capitals. My place is among the wolves." She nodded slowly. Silence enveloped them, tinged with a strange sense of closure. The setting sun cast orange light across the city. Far below, vendors peddled spices, freedmen guards patrolled. Men and women strove to find normalcy. For once, no roars split the air. Drogon rested quietly on a ledge. The wound dressings changed daily by Morris and Daenerys. At last, Daenerys placed a hand over Jon's. Her skin was warmer now, less clammy than before. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for coming here, for helping. I see now that you did care about me in your way, even when you banished me." Jon swallowed the ache in his throat. "I wish things had been different, that we could have found another way long ago." She turned her face to the dimming sky. "So do I." They stayed there a long while, letting the final shards of daylight slip into night. No more words were needed, just the shared understanding that something vast and tragic had come to a quiet end. Daenerys had relinquished her destructive ambitions, and in doing so, perhaps found a spark of the idealism that once guided her. Jon had come face to face with his own regrets, and in helping her find peace, he might finally begin to forgive himself. In the weeks that followed, the Freedmen Council took the reins of governance, aided by Dario's Stormcrows in maintaining a shaky order. Sporadic unrest flared, but it never escalated to full-blown revolt. Daenerys withdrew from the city's politics, devoting her time to Drogon's healing and making plans for her eventual departure. Jon and Davos, fulfilling their pledge, remained as neutral arbiters, stepping in only to mediate disputes or quell any sign of violence aimed at Daenerys or the freedmen. By the second moon of that transitional period, Drogon showed marked improvement. He ventured short flights, gliding from the pyramid to a nearby wall and back. He no longer roared in pain during the night. Though not fully recovered, he grew stronger by the day, hunting small game outside the city. Daenerys's limp also lessened, her stamina returning with each dawn. She did not speak of a final destination, only that once Drogon could safely fly long distances, she would depart. One afternoon, Jon found her in a quiet courtyard beneath the pyramid, practicing Valyrian commands with Drogon. She held out a piece of raw meat, speaking softly, and the dragon snapped it up with relative gentleness. Ghost lingered at the edge of the courtyard, watchful. Jon admired the sight, Daenerys smiling faintly as Drogon bent his massive head to nudge her palm. For a fleeting moment, the world felt at peace. She noticed Jon and waved him over. "He's almost ready," she said, stroking a ridged scale that had regrown over a once festering wound. "I can sense it. He wants the open skies again, yearns to fly beyond the city's walls." Jon nodded. "Then it seems we've done all we can here." She gazed at him, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "So it seems. Will you go back to Westeros soon?" Jon paused, tension in his chest. "Yes. My duty there is not over. Once you take flight or sail away, I'll leave Meereen to its new council. Davos and I will return to King's Landing, Let them know the threat of the Dragon Queen is ended. She let out a soft sigh. They'll be glad to hear it, I'm sure. They don't hate you, Daenerys. They fear what you did. But maybe, in time, they'll remember the better side of you. She said nothing for a moment, focusing on Drogon's slow, rhythmic breathing. Then, quietly, I don't need their memories. I just want to live free of this cycle. Jon understood. He stepped closer, so close that the tips of his boots nearly touched hers. Gently, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered, full of emotion. I hope you find peace, he murmured. She laid a hand on his chest, over the scars left by past battles. I hope you do too, Jon Snow. They lingered for a heartbeat, an electric hush between them. Then they parted, as though some invisible boundary would not allow them to unite. Too much blood, too many ghosts. Still, the moment held warmth, a bittersweet acknowledgement that despite everything, a piece of them would always care. That evening, Daenerys summoned Jon, Davos, and Daario to inform them of her departure. The Freedmen's Council was apprised, and no protest arose. Some were even relieved. A small caravan of supplies was prepared to accompany her to the coastline, from which she intended to fly Drogon to a distant land or secure passage to more uncharted shores. She gave no specific destination. That, she said, she would discover when the wind guided her. On the appointed dawn, Jon Snow and a handful of his knights stood with Davos and Daario outside the city gates, watching as Daenerys Targaryen emerged for the last time. She wore simple traveling leathers, her silver hair braided tightly back. Drogon paced beside her, wings half-furled, like a loyal hound, an enormous, terrifying winged hound. Freedmen guards and curious onlookers gathered at a distance, unsure whether to cheer or simply watch in somber acceptance. Naya, the head of the council, stepped forward. Queen Daenerys, she caught herself. Daenerys Stormborn, may the winds favor you. We will keep the vow of freedom in this city. Daenerys inclined her head, a faint smile on her lips. I pray you do. Daario bowed with a flourish. Good fortune, my queen. If ever you need a cell's word. He paused, emotion flickering across his roguish features. It has been an honor. She touched his arm lightly, a silent farewell. Then her gaze turned to Davos. Thank you, Ser Davos, for your fairness. Davos managed a half-smile. I only did what was needed. Wish you well, Daenerys. At last, Daenerys came to stand before Jon, the hush of finality in the air. Ghost sniffed at Drogon, but wisely kept a respectful distance. Daenerys searched Jon's face. I will not forget what you did for me here, she said quietly. Nor the cost of my actions in Westeros. We part as not friends, perhaps, but not enemies. Jon inclined his head. As equals who have seen each other's worst and best. She exhaled, lips trembling. Take care, Jon Snow. Without further words, she climbed onto Drogon's back, her movements careful but sure. The black dragon spread his mighty wings, the morning sun glinting on newly healed scales. A hush fell as Drogon launched himself skyward in a gust of wind and dust. Daenerys clung to him, her braided hair snapping in the breeze, a solitary figure. They climbed higher, the city shrinking below. Jon watched, heart heavy yet uplifted by relief, as the last dragon soared over the battlements, across the plains, and vanished into the eastern sky. Davos let out a long breath. Gods be good, it's done. Daario ran a hand through his curls. A new chapter for Meereen, and for her. He glanced at Jon. Will you stay a while, or return to your realm at once? Jon looked at the city gates, the freedmen who stood uncertainly, and the wide emptiness left by Daenerys' departure. A few days, he said quietly, just to ensure the transition is stable. Daario nodded. I'll remain too. The Stormcrows have a contract to keep the peace. But my destiny probably lies elsewhere in time. With that, they re-entered Meereen, a city where the last Targaryen had released her grip. The freedmen now held their fate in their own hands, no longer overshadowed by a dragon queen. Jon felt the stirrings of a new peace in his chest. The threat of Daenerys' wrath was gone from Westeros, and she had chosen another path. A path away from conquest, away from the hunger for a throne that had devoured so many lives. Over the ensuing days, the Freedmen Council solidified its hold, with Dario's mercenaries backing them until a local defense force could be formed. Sporadic violence continued in some quarters, but it lacked the scale it once had. Jon and Davos offered advice where they could, then prepared for departure. They loaded the Iron Grace with fresh provisions, mindful that Westeros awaited news of Daenerys' abdication. On the morning they left Meereen, a small crowd gathered at the docks. Some freedmen waved or bowed, acknowledging the role Jon and Davos had played in securing peace. Others kept their distance, uncertain how to regard foreigners who had arrived with their banished queen and then brokered a strange truce. Jon felt no need for fanfare. He boarded the ship quietly, Ghost at his side, turning to take one last look at the city. The Great Pyramid loomed, and in his mind's eye he saw Daenerys standing atop it with Drogon, a lonely queen forging her own destiny. The sails unfurled, the ship catching the warm breeze. As they navigated out of the harbor, Davos joined Jon at the prow. "We did it, lad," Davos said, relief coloring his tone. "No more dragon queen threatening the realm." Jon nodded, exhaling slowly. "She's gone. And I pray she finds a better life somewhere." Davos studied him. "You truly forgive her?" Jon considered, eyes on the horizon. "Forgiveness, maybe not fully, but I've seen her soul. She's paid her price. Perhaps that's enough." The days of their return voyage slipped by in a calmer blur. They stopped briefly for resupply in Volantis, where they learned that rumors of Daenerys Targaryen had already begun swirling. Some claimed she was flying east, others that she might be building a new settlement on remote shores. Nothing was certain. Jon felt a strange sort of freedom in that uncertainty. She was no longer a threat to Westeros, and she was no longer a figure of unstoppable destruction. She was a woman, forging her own path with her dragon, beyond the shadow of the Iron Throne. When at last the Iron Grace reached King's Landing, Tyrion, Brienne, and others were there to greet them at the docks. The city had continued its slow rebuilding, and the scorched walls looked more robust than ever, lined with watchful scorpion ballistae. Jon and Davos disembarked, weary but alive, with Ghost at their heels. Tyrion hurried forward, eyes bright with questions. "Well, is it over?" Jon grasped Tyrion's hand. "She relinquished her claim to Westeros. She left Meereen to the freedmen. She's gone." She and Drogon flew east. Tyrion's shoulders sagged with relief. "So there won't be a third war?" "No," Jon shook his head. "She's done with the throne." A hush of awe passed over the small gathering. Tyrion closed his eyes, exhaling. "Thank the gods. Let's inform the king." In a formal session a day later, Jon Snow reported to King Bran and the assembled lords. He described how Daenerys had abdicated, how Meereen was now self-governed, how Drogon lived but was no longer a weapon pointed at Westeros. He glossed over the details of her pain and madness, simply stating that she had chosen peace. The lords listened in a mix of astonishment and relief. Some demanded proof that she wouldn't return. Jon maintained that she had renounced her claim before multiple witnesses, and that her parting words confirmed she desired no further war. King Bran, in his calm, knowing way, accepted Jon's account. A new edict was issued. Daenerys Targaryen posed no threat, and the realm would trouble itself with her no more. That night, Jon walked the walls of King's Landing, the city lights twinkling below like scattered embers. Ghost trotted beside him, muzzle lifted to the breeze. He could sense the city's pulse, still scarred, but beating with renewed life. Above, the sky stretched vast and star-flecked, no silhouettes of dragons crossing the moon. The threat was gone. For the first time in years, the future felt open. He thought of Daenerys, imagining her flying over distant deserts or seas, Drogon's wings beating the air. Perhaps she would find a land that embraced her as a hero again, or perhaps she would wander in quiet anonymity. Whatever her path, it was hers to choose. And whatever regrets Jon carried, at least he had helped steer the realm away from further bloodshed. Banishment had once felt like a terrible half-measure. Now it had ended in a tenuous redemption for them both. He closed his eyes, letting the night wind brush his face. Sorrow and gratitude mingled in his chest. He said a silent goodbye to the woman he had loved and feared. Then he turned away, stepping down from the rampart, heading toward whatever life still awaited him in these still-healing kingdoms. Love, duty, sacrifice. These old themes wove through his story and hers, shaping a conclusion neither had foreseen. In the hush of night, a wolf's howl drifted from somewhere beyond the city. Jon glanced at Ghost, but the dire wolf only flicked an ear. Perhaps it was a memory, or a real wolf in the distant wood. Either way, Jon felt the call of the north, the lure of simpler horizons. He resolved to visit Winterfell soon, to kneel at the old god's weirwood and let the ancient branches bear witness to his burdens. In time, maybe the ghosts of Dragonfire would recede, leaving behind the faint warmth of a love once shared and a realm at last free from the deadly wrath of a Targaryen undone by her own dreams. And so the story turned, the wheel broken in a way few had expected, with a queen's banishment leading to an unlikely, precarious peace. Westeros looked forward, rebuilding from ashes. Essos, too, waited to see what shape Daenerys Stormborn's future would take. But for Jon Snow, the horizon was clear of dragons, the bells were silent, and his heart, though scarred, beat with the resolve that he had done his duty and, in doing so, perhaps saved the realm, and the woman he once loved, from total ruin. If she soared into legend, he would not begrudge her that fate. He only prayed that somewhere in the wide world, she found the solace that had always eluded them both.